budget. And this motion, of course, will be seeking the Senate to adopt the report of the Standing Committee on Finance and Budget on the 2023 medium-term debt management strategy that was laid on the table of the Senate on Tuesday, 28th of February, the year 2023. Senate members will also be considering the motion on the adoption of the report of the Standing Committee on Justice, Legal Affairs and Human Rights on the proposed appointment of Honorable Johnson Muthama as a commissioner to the Parliamentary Service Commission. This is a motion that is being moved by the Chairperson Standing Committee on Justice, Legal Affairs and Human Rights. And this motion, of course, will be seeking the House to approve the appointment of Honorable Muthama as a commissioner of the Parliamentary Service Commission. The fourth motion that is lined up for consideration is on the provision of free sanitary towels to end period poverty. This is a motion that has been moved by nominated Senator Honorable Gloria Oroba, and the motion is lined up for consideration this afternoon as well. It has been on the floor of the House for the past three sittings, and today this motion is also lined up for debate and discussion or consideration on the floor of the Senate members. 4 bills are lined up for second reading. There is the bill on the Parliamentary Powers and Privileges Amendment Bill that is originating from the Senate, Bill number 5 of 2022. This is a bill that has been tabled by Tana River Senator Honorable Danson Mungatana, and debate on this bill began on the 23rd of February 2023. There will be resumption of debate on that bill this afternoon, and then members will go into division on this bill. Just a look at what the Parliamentary Powers and Privileges Amendment Bill, Senate Bill number 5 of 2022, is all about is that the bill provides a structured mechanism through which the executive and the independent commissions and offices are required to give greater consideration to the issues raised and the recommendations made by Parliament. The bill imposes a specific obligation on officials of the executive, constitutional commissions, and independent offices to comply with the requirement to give feedback to Parliament's resolutions. This has been difficult to achieve through the standing orders of the Houses of Parliament, since they are rules for orderly and effective discharge of the business of Parliament, unlike legislation which has a binding effect on those to whom it applies. Although the current standing orders provide for reporting on resolutions, very few reports are ever submitted on action taken on the resolutions passed by Parliament. This is a bill that is tabled by Tana River Senator Honorable Danson Mungatana, and debate on this bill will resume this afternoon. Of course, the resumption of this bill is from a debate that was interrupted on the 23rd of February, the year 2023, and members will be going into division on that bill. The County Vocational Education and Training Bill, originating from the Senate, Bill number 3 of 2022, by Honorable Senator Moses Kajwang, is also lined up for second reading. We also have the Natural Resources Benefit Sharing Bill. This is also originating from the Senate, Bill number 6 of 2022, again by Honorable Danson Mungatana. There is also the Preservation of Human Dignity and Enforcement of Economic and Social Rights Bill. This bill is also originating from the Senate, Bill number 7 of 2022, again by Tana River Senator Honorable Danson Mungatana. A look at the Preservation of Human Dignity and Enforcement of Economic and Social Rights Bill is that the bill The realization of the economic reasons for this bill is that the realization of the economic and social rights has continually been tied to the availability of resources and rarely seen as being inherent in a person by virtue of being a human being. As a result, there has been little emphasis in availing goods and services that would ensure the economic and social rights for all are realized. Large gaps therefore exist that require urgent intervention through policy and legislation, and that is basically what the bill talks about. At the entrance of the Senate chambers, the Speaker, Honorable Amason Jeffa Kingi, has stepped into the chambers. He will be presiding over this afternoon session. I will now hand you over for this live broadcast brought to you by KBC in partnership with PBU. My name is Kamche Menza. Good afternoon.
I beseech you to behold with your abundant favor and blessings us, your servants whom we have been pleased to call to leadership positions in this republic. We seek guidance to treat and consider all matters that shall come under deliberations in so just and faithful a manner as to advance the peace, prosperity, and welfare of our country and of those whose interests you have committed to our charge. Amen. Clerk, we have quorum. Sergeant at arms, kindly ring the bell for 5 minutes.
Well, Speaker of the Senate, Honorable Amason Kingi, has just ordered for the quorum bell to be rung. This is according to the standing orders that needs to ensure there is a requisite quorum in the House before the House kicks off its business. The bell will be rung for 5 minutes as directed by the Speaker, of course, to allow members who are yet to get into the chambers to participate in today's afternoon sitting to be able to do so as quickly as possible. So the bell will be rung for 5 minutes. There is a requirement of 15 members in the chambers before the House begins. And looking at what is in the order paper or business that is meant to be considered by the members in the House this afternoon is that 4 bills will be read for the second time, with the Parliamentary Powers and Privileges Amendment Bill originating from the Senate, whose debate took place on the 23rd of February 2022, will be resuming debate on this particular bill. It is at the second stage, and division on this bill will also be taking place this afternoon. The Natural Resources Benefit Sharing Bill from the Senate Bill number 6 of 2022 by Tana River Senator Honorable Danson Mungatana is also lined up for second reading. And this bill seeks to provide a legislative framework for the establishment and enforcement of a system of benefit sharing in natural resource exploitation between natural resource exploiters, the national government, county governments, and local communities. And to that end provides that the Commission for Revenue Allocation oversees the same, according to the author of this bill, is that the bill, once enacted, would confer on the Cabinet Secretary responsible for matters relating to natural resources the power to make regulations for the purposes of bringing into effect the provisions contained in the bill. It therefore delegates limited and conditional legislative powers It also says that the bill does not limit fundamental rights and freedoms. The bill concerns county governments in that it contains provisions that, among others, affect local community participation and prioritization, administration and utilization of funds within counties. The bill, therefore, affects the functions and powers of county governments in a number of terms as established in Article 110, subsection 1A of the Constitution. So this is a bill that is also lined up for consideration. It is at the second stage, the Natural Resources Benefit Sharing Bill, originating from the Senate Bill number 6 of 2022. Members are expected to walk into the chambers. Looks like we have the quorum.
Chair.
For the signal. But we have the quorum. I now hand you over for this live broadcast. Good afternoon.
Honorable Senators, I'd like to acknowledge the presence in the Speaker's Gallery this afternoon, a visiting delegation from the Gambia National Assembly Authority. The delegation comprises leadership of the National Assembly of Gambia, who are on a 5-day study tour in the Senate. Honorable Senators, I request each member of the delegation to stand when called out so that you may be acknowledged in the Senate tradition. Honorable Fabakri Tubong Jatta, the Speaker of the National Assembly of Gambia. The Honorable Alhagi S. Dabo, the Minority Leader and Member of the Authority. Honorable members, it seems that this delegation is yet to arrive into the chamber. A few minutes ago, they paid a courtesy call in my office. So I will hold this communication until the delegation makes its way into the House. Honorable members, we will proceed with the other order, and we will come back to this order once the delegation is in the House. Next order, Clerk.
Order number 3, messages. Order number 4, petitions. Order number 5, papers.
The chairperson of the Standing Committee on Finance and Budget, kindly proceed to lay your papers.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I beg to lay the following papers on the table of the Senate today, 28 February 2023. Report of the Standing Committee on Finance and Budget on the 2023 Medium-Term Debt Management Strategy. And Mr. Speaker, sir, I also beg to lay the following papers on the table of the Senate today, the 28th of February 2023. Report on the Standing Committee on Finance and Budget on the 2023 Budget Policy Statement. I beg to lay.
The The Chairperson, Standing Committee on Justice, Legal Affairs and Human Rights, kindly proceed to lay your papers.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I beg to lay the following paper on the table of the Senate today, the 28th day of February 2023, and that is the report on the proposed appointment of Honorable Johnson Muthama as a member of the Parliamentary Service Commission under Article 127, Sub-Article 2D of the Constitution of Kenya. I beg to lay.
The Honorable Senator Tabitha Mutinda, kindly proceed to lay your paper. Your report on the 61st session of AU, Caribbean and Pacific States.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay the following paper on the table of the Senate. Today, the 20th of February, 2023, report of the 61st session of the OSCPS Parliamentary Assembly and the report of the 42nd session of the ACP-EU Joint Parliamentary Assembly held in Maputo, Mozambique on 23rd October to 2nd November 2022. I submit.
Next order, Clerk.
Order number 6, notices of motion.
The Chairperson, Finance.
Honorable Speaker, I beg to give notice of motion on adoption of the report of the Standing Committee on Finance and Budget on the 2023 Budget Policy Statement, that the Senate adopts the report of the Standing Committee on Finance and Budget on the 2023 Budget Policy Statement laid on this table today, the 28th of February 2023, and pursuant to Section 25(7) of Public Finance Management Act and Standing Order number 186(7) of the Senate. Thank you.
The Chairperson, you had 2 notices to give, is it?
Honorable Speaker, I also wish to give notice of motion on the adaptation of the report of the Standing Committee on Finance on the 2023 medium-term debt management strategy, that the Senate adopts the report of Standing Committee on Finance and Budget on the 2023 medium-term debt management strategy laid on the table of the Senate 28th of February 2023.
The chairperson of JLAC.
Honorable Speaker, I beg to give notice of the following motion, that the Senate adopts the report of the Standing Committee on Justice, Legal Affairs and Human Rights on the proposed appointment of the Honorable Johnson Mudama as a Commissioner of the Parliamentary Service Commission, laid on the table of the Senate today, Tuesday, 28th of February 2023, and pursuant to Article 127 2D of the Constitution, Section 9(2) of the Parliamentary Service Act, and Standing Order 77-3 approves the appointment of the Honorable Johnson Mudama as a Commissioner of the Parliamentary Service Commission. Thank you.
The Honorable Tabitha.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I beg to give notice of the following motion, that the Senate notes the report of the 61st session of the Organization of the African, Caribbean and Pacific States Parliamentary Assembly and the 42nd session of the OSCPS EU Joint Parliamentary Assembly held in Maputo, Mozambique on 23rd October to 2nd November 2022.
Next order, Clerk.
Order number 7, statements.
Senator Chirange.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Statement on an issue of general topical concern. Good performance posted by our cross-country team at the just concluded World Athletics Cross-Country Championship in Australia. Mr. Speaker, sir, I rise pursuant to Standing Order 52.1 to make a statement on the issue of general topical concern and national importance, namely good performance posted by our cross-country team at the just concluded World Athletics Cross-Country Championships in Australia. Mr. Speaker, sir, it was a great honor to see our gallant athletes performing at the World Cross Country Championships, where Team Kenya topped the medal standing in Australia with 10 medals, 6 gold, 2 silver, and 2 bronze. They also managed to claim 2 individual titles, that is mixed relay title and 3 team titles. Mr. Speaker, sir, our team, captained by Kibiwot Kandie, saw Beatrice Chebet scale to senior ranks in style by winning senior women's 10 kilometers title, as Agnes Chebet settled for bronze in the same race. And no relationship with the famous Agnes Chebet that was killed a few years ago. While Ismail Kipkirui and Reynold Kipkorir won 1-2 in the men's under 20 8 kilometers race, as Pamela Kosgei claimed bronze in the women's under 26 kilometers contest. Then Emmanuel Wanyonyi, Miriam Cherop, Kiyumbe Munguti, and Brenda Chebet won the mixed relay race. Mr. Speaker, sir, this superb performance has sent a serious warning to our competitors and the world that Kenya is still the force to reckon with an arm of athletics in the world. I wish to appreciate the early team selection and good preparations that were accorded to this team before they traveled to Australia. During and after the champions, and wish the Athletics Kenya, Ministry of Sports and other stakeholders will continue with this trend for the entire season, especially in the upcoming major events across the country. I also wish to call at least, Mr. Speaker, and the issue of doping has become a serious concern, especially in our sports, to remain clean and dedicate to their careers by avoiding doping that has dented the image of our athletes and the country at large at world sports, at the world stage, Mr. Speaker. And the consequences, of course, are very dire. Mr. Speaker, sir, in conclusion, I wish to call upon the government to use these upcoming and promising athletes as brand ambassadors, issue them with diplomatic passports, and ensure their finance and rewards, and also allow them, Mr. Speaker, tax-free against the awards that they win across the champions, are proper and provided even with counseling and also advice on financial management, Mr. Speaker, to enable them to grow and remain motivated at all times. Mr. Speaker, sir, on behalf of the great people of Nandi, the source of champions, and on behalf of Senate, Mr. Speaker, and Kenyans of goodwill, I wish to congratulate our gallant athletes for this performance of getting 10 medals and wish them well, assuring them of our commitment and the support at all times as they continue to fly the flag of our great nation in the world stage of athletics, Mr. Speaker. Those very many remarks, I thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir.
What is your point of order, Senator Cheptumo?
Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry. I think I pressed the button wrongly.
Very well.
I have no point of order now.
Senator Mwaruma? That statement is deferred. Senator Hamida Kibwana? That statement is deferred. Senator Professor Tom Odhiambo Ojenda? That statement is deferred. Next order, clerk. What is your point of order, Majority Leader?
Mr. Speaker, thanks for your indulgence. I want to humbly plead that you help us rearrange the order paper because we have a motion which has a statutory deadline. If we do not consider the motion on the approval of a member, non-member commissioner to PAC by tomorrow, then the member stands confirmed despite the lack of participation by the Senate, Mr. Speaker. So I want to humbly request that we dispense of this motion, allow colleagues to speak to it as briefly as we could, and dispense of this motion so that at least when you go to the annals of history, it will be known that Senate also made a contribution into the confirmation of this member. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Majority Leader. Indeed, we shall proceed to prosecute that business as a priority, noting that today is actually the deadline. So, Clerk, kindly proceed to rearrange and call that particular order.
Order number 10, motion, adoption of the reports of the Standing Committee on Justice, Legal Affairs and Human Rights on the proposed appointment of Honorable Johnson Muthama as a Commissioner to the Parliamentary Service Commission.
The Chairperson, J. Luck.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I want to move the motion that the Senate adopts the report of the Standing Committee on Justice, Legal Affairs and Human Rights on the proposed appointment of the Honorable Johnson Muthama as a Commissioner of the Parliamentary Service Commission, laid on the table of the Senate today, 28 February 2023, Tuesday, and pursuant to Article 127, Sub-Article 2D of the Constitution of Kenya, Section 9(2) of the Parliamentary Service Act, and Standing Order 77(3) approves the appointment of the Honorable Johnson Muthama as a Commissioner of the Parliamentary Service Commission. Mr. Speaker, I move and I want to request the Honorable Senator Tabitha Mutinda to second the motion.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to second the motion, and I request to proceed to contribute to the same motion. This is because Honorable Senator Johnson Muthama is a reputable leader in this country, and he's just currently the former chairman of UDA, whereby as Kenya Kwanza we really recognize and appreciate his services and how he's been able to run the party to the point of delivering the president and the deputy president in this country. Johnson Muthama has been a member of parliament from 2007 to actually 2013, and from 2013-2017 he's also been in this house as Senate, a reputable leader who is also a businessman who runs different companies, and currently a director of Gemstone Limited. So in this new position, I believe Senator Johnson Muthama will be able to execute his duties, his mandate as required. He's also qualified academically, and he's actually a Kamba leader and a politician, and we know that he's going to be able to perform. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
What is your point of order, Senator Cheptumo? If you need to contribute, you do not need to raise up a hand.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, oh, okay.
Senator Cheptumo, from the intervention here, you are raising on a point of order because we are yet to get to that stage you want to participate. What is your point of order, Senator Kenyua?
Bwana Spika, nimemsikia Senator Tabitha akisema ya kwamba Senator ambaye anakuja ya kwamba ni Mkamba, lakini nataka tu kusema ya kwamba yeye ni kiongozi katika nchi ya Kenya. Bwana Spika, unakumbuka yeye ndiye alikuwa mwenyekiti wa chama cha UDA, chama kinachoongoza. Kwa hivyo nilitaka tu tuondoe katika kumbukumbu zetu isionekane kana kwamba yeye ni kiongozi tu wa Wakamba.
Senator, ikiwa nimemsikiza vizuri Senator Tabitha Mutinda, alisema kwamba yeye ni kiongozi wa kitaifa wa Kikamba. Anatoka Ukambani. Honorable Senators, I do now propose the question that the Senate adopt the report of the Standing Committee on Justice, Legal Affairs and Human Rights on the proposed appointment of Honorable Johnson Muthama as a Commissioner of the Parliamentary Service Commission, laid on the table of the Senate today, Tuesday, 28 February 2023, and pursuant to Article 127(2)(d) of the Constitution, Section 9(2) of the Parliamentary Service Act, and Standing Order 773, approve the appointment of Honorable Johnson Muthama as a Commissioner of the Parliamentary Service Commission. Honorable members, you may now proceed to make your contribution. The Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to support this motion. I support this motion brought by Justice and Legal Affairs Committee, requesting us as a House to approve the nomination after a successful interview by the PSC itself of Senator Johnson Duya Muthama, a former colleague of ours that we served with in this House, Mr. Speaker, was quite an interesting member, Mr. Speaker, and made most of his contribution actually in Kiswahili language. I enjoyed debating them those days together with my colleague, now on this side of the House, Senator Boni Halwale. Then they sat on the opposite side of the aisle and kept government in check, as was expected of them those days. But as political fate will have it, we are together now, batting for the same team. Of course, until Senator Muthama, very few weeks ago, quit as the chairperson of the party that I belong to, the United Democratic Alliance, to pursue his dream of representing members of the public in the PSC. This position, Mr. Speaker, is specially reserved for one man and one woman, as per the dictates of Article 127 of our Constitution, where the drafters of our Constitution felt that even inside of PSC, which is made up of insiders of Parliament, the Speaker of the National Assembly and members drawn from both houses, Mr. Speaker, there was need to have two members of the public who will infuse and bring the public perception and public views into matters and debates that go on in PSC. I know this for a fact, Mr. Speaker, having served previously as a commissioner representing the Senate in PSC. I know the important role that the members of the public who are nominated to PSC continue to serve. On many occasions, Mr. Speaker, when we have our debates, most of the time they remind us that despite Parliament being a very powerful institution, it is important that we shoulder and carry the responsibility bestowed upon us of always remembering that at the end of the day, even as we do our budget and all matters that we consider before PSC, that members of the public are looking up to us. I fully endorse Senator Johnson Muthama, knowing his capacity as a politician, as a leader in this country, as somebody who's been in the political field for quite a while, that PSC is all the more richer because of his inclusion, Mr. Speaker, once this House agree to the recommendation of Justice and Legal Affairs and ratifies the decision, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I also wish to say that even as we continue with the deliberations that are going on between this House and the lower house, Mr. Speaker, PSC Act remains to be a thorn in the flesh. One of the reasons why I approached you this afternoon, Mr. Speaker, is because I felt it will be tremendous injustice if now, as we speak today, we have an act that governs the operations of both houses of Parliament that was considered by one house only. It would have even been a greater travesty, Mr. Speaker, if we went on ahead and not concluded on this business today. And I must appreciate Justice and Legal Affairs for the good work that they've done in expediting this process, ensuring that the report is ready despite the short time and period that they had in considering this particular matter. It would have been terrible, Mr. Speaker, if we didn't conclude on this motion. And it still be, because I know probably many people still want to speak on it. And in fact, I'll restrict my comments, Mr. Speaker, because I'd wish that as many colleagues speak about PSC, because PSC is your body. It's a body that represents your interest. It's a body that addresses all your challenges as a members of Parliament. And this is one such motion that I wish, Mr. Speaker, that as many as all the colleagues that are in the House and are willing to speak are granted the opportunity. I'm glad, Mr. Speaker, that we are considering this motion today. And as Senator Muthama once approved, should this House successfully pass this motion, Mr. Speaker, will remember and know what were the thoughts of senators when they shared when they actually agreed with Justice and Legal Affairs to approve his nomination, Mr. Speaker. The second thing, Mr. Speaker, I wish to remind our colleagues, specifically the members that serve in PSC. I see Senator Kinyo is in the House. I don't see my friend Senator Omogeni and Senator Joyce Korir, who represent this House in PSC, to always defend the position of Senate. To remember that before being commissioners, they are first senators. And I hope that they are in, now that we have succeeded to add another senator, despite the fact that I know that Senator Mudhama previously served in the National Assembly. At least under this constitution, he served as a senator. And many of his views are tempered, and he understands our position and our challenges, the unique and difficult situation that we find ourselves in as Senate, of always continuing to be underrepresented in PSC, Mr. Speaker. You know full well that, unfortunately, in the terms that have been in this House, Mr. Speaker, the majority side, unfortunately, has no control over the representation and the number that Senate can send to PSC. Because out of the 4 positions that is granted, the majority side will always divide 2 from the Senate side and 2 from the National Assembly. It is our colleagues from the minority side, and I wish they were here when I spoke about this, because I remember members conversing on this point when we first came to this House, that can help us pass on the point to the leadership of their parties to understand that in a particular term of parliament, if you give out of your 3 slots to PSC, 2 to the National Assembly this term, then it follows that in the subsequent term, the 2 commissioners should come from the other house. It's unfortunate, Mr. Speaker, that in the last 3 sessions where we have PSC, the minority side has always sent 2 representatives from the National Assembly and only 1 from the Senate. Therefore, tilting the balance of scale, unfortunately, more to the side of the National Assembly. I am glad, Mr. Speaker, that with the nomination of Senator Mudhama, this at least attempts to bring some equity and equilibrium in this conversation, so that when there are matters to be discussed, there are very important decisions that are made, Mr. Speaker, in PSC that affects our welfare, that affects our well-being as members of parliament, that even affects how we execute and live up to the constitutional responsibility that we've been granted by the people of Kenya, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, I want to challenge our colleagues who sit in PSC to quickly, as soon as possible, as soon as this House dispenses off this particular matter, have a conversation with Senator Mudhama. Let him know that as Senate we look up to him, having been previously our colleague, to advance generally the interest of Parliament, the public that he represents, but not to forget that he has previously been a senator, and it's important that our place in PSC is guaranteed, and the many different decisions that are made in PSC are actually upheld in favor of us as a House, Mr. Speaker, because we unfortunately suffer the constitutional design of not being the House that controls the purse. And you know, Mr. Speaker, what Chinua Achebe said about the yam and the knife. He who has the knife determines the size of the yam that they are going to share with you. And that is an unfortunate situation we find ourselves. We neither have the knife, nor do we have the yam, Mr. Speaker. And on many occasions, as Senate, we feel fairly shortchanged, though we have made progressively over the years, Mr. Speaker, we have succeeded in almost being at par with our colleagues from the National Assembly on many fronts. I celebrate the work that PSC has done. I wish Senator Mudhama well as he serves us, generally as Parliament, and as he represents the views of the public. Of course, Parliament, Mr. Speaker, and this is my final point, must have an introspective attitude, despite the fact that the Constitution grants its enormous powers. When you can control the budget of a country, the colleagues that you go and present, make your budget before, many of the times we as Parliament, we find ourselves in situations where perhaps there can be excesses on our sides and forget the unique situation that we find ourselves as a country, where just as the entire globe is suffering from an economic recession, we as a country are particularly affected because of our debt situation. I know as a budget and as I make plans and consideration, they'll always remember the number one thing that also senators have continued to speak passionately about, the issue of a Senate Oversight Fund, Mr. Speaker, which unfortunately, much as we wish and desire to have it as soon as yesterday, is not a decision that only we as a House can execute. In fact, some have falsely held the view, Mr. Speaker, that even at PSC that decision can be made. The unfortunate answer I have for the House, Mr. Speaker, and I know this from practice, having tried 5 times appearing before the Budget Committee of the National Assembly, is that that decision rests there. As PSC, on year, we made recommendations. We've put it in our budget and annual estimates when we presented before these committees. Unfortunately, when the rubber meets the road and the appropriation bill is brought before the Assembly, somehow, somewhere, it never finds its way there. I hope the new team that we have put in office can find ways through which this can be agreed. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I beg to support and wish Senator Johnston Nduya Muthama well as he serves us in PSC. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Boni.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to support this motion as read, as moved, and as proposed, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish to congratulate Senator Johnston Nduya Muthama for this appointment, and I pray to this House colleagues, both sides, minority and majority, that we pass this name unanimously. Why, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, because Senator Muthama has seen it all. I remember when I first worked with Senator Muthama in the National Assembly and later in this Senate. When we were drafting the Constitution, we took time to decide which commissions would stand in the Constitution and what those commissions would be doing. And as a result of that consideration, we found that the judiciary would be stronger if we had a Judiciary Service Commission, and Parliament would be stronger, effective, and fair if we had a Parliamentary Service Commission. I therefore wish to celebrate the fact that the due process, without any undue influence, has allowed the name of Johnston Muthama to appear before the floor of this House, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, for Kenyans who might not be appreciating who Muthama is, it is the English people who say, if you know my name, but you don't know my story, you don't know me. I know Muthama's name, I know his story, I know him, and I can vouch for him that with him we shall have a stronger Parliament. Mr. Speaker, Johnston Muthama, when he was a member of Parliament of Kangundo in the National Assembly, he rose to become the Chief Whip. And Muthama, as the Chief Whip of Mwai Kibaki, working together with the Chief Whip of Raila Odinga during the Grand Coalition government, Jacob Mediwo, they led the House, and I was privileged under these two men to have an opportunity to serve as the Chairman of Public Accounts, and we really fought corruption. Mr. Speaker, there is a company in this country which approached government for a joint venture in printing of Kenya currency called De La Rue. Senator Muthama, then Member of Parliament for Kangundo, and I, we connived and fought that JV But unfortunately, we lost. As I look back, I say, not always the majority is right. Because as we lost our fight against that JV, little did the majority know that we were right, because today, the same venture where Kenya lost an investment of 650 million shillings into a joint venture with Dilaru has walked out. They have suspended the tender, the contract of printing Kenya currency. Today, we have 300 workers who are now jobless out of direct jobs at Dilaru, accompanied with another 3,000 Kenyans who have got loss of jobs in the supply chain of the currency printing. Mr. Speaker, Senator Mdama, as a senator in this House, demonstrated that he was indeed a son of that struggle, to the extent that there was a time, Mr. Speaker, Senator Mdama, Senator Orengo, Senator Wetangula, and I, we created a tag team, went to the National Assembly, and pleaded with them to be aware of poor legislation. Those were the days of the tyranny of numbers. And thanks to the tyranny of numbers, we visited this House, we visited this country with the infamous miscellaneous laws on our security. Again, the majority won in this House, but we, the minority, then went to court and we won. In some of the cases, Mr. Speaker, Mudama literally used to pay for us. Mr. Speaker, Senator Mudama has left strong footprints in the struggle for good leadership. I remember him and I. We sat for many hours plotting how to make Raila Odinga stronger, and we did. But when we were out of the election defeated and we were forced to go to the opposition, again we forced Raila and told him, you don't just oppose for the sake of opposing. You must be a responsible opposition. And that is how we broke out with him, because he decided to lie to Kenyans that they go to Uhuru Park and he swears himself in as a president. To do good politics, you don't always have to oppose everything for the sake of opposing. Mr. Speaker, I'm therefore glad that I've put my name on this particular motion, and I hope that Senator Mudama, when he comes here, he'll be the same man of integrity that he has been all these years. I support.
Senator Margaret Kamar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me the opportunity to join my colleagues, first in congratulating Senator Mudama for the nomination to be in the Parliamentary Service Commission. Mr. Speaker, I and you were in the 10th Parliament, where Senator Mudama served as a member of Parliament, and we know him. The much he knows parliamentary rules, parliamentary services, and I really believe that he's going to serve as a very good commissioner. Mr. Speaker, Senator Mudama is one person who has served both in the National Assembly and in the Senate. And I want to agree with the leader of majority that this is one person that may bring in equality between the two houses when it comes to benefits and when it comes to services to this house. The role of the Parliamentary Service Commission, Mr. Speaker, is a very important role in the welfare and interests of the House. And it's always welfare and interests of the House that will push the performance of the members of the House. So I personally have no doubt that we have the right person in the person of Senator Mudama to join the colleagues in both houses in transacting the matters. We will encourage him to continue to be that neutral, to look at the two houses equally, because we only have 2 members who are external to this house, so that even when there are conflicts between the interests of each of the houses, we expect these 2 members to stand out, to be the ones that will look at things in a very moderate manner and to be able to equalize. With those remarks, Mr. Speaker, I congratulate Senator Mudama and thank the committee for working on this document very fast. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I support.
Senator Danson Mungatana.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me the opportunity to contribute in this motion. Mr. Speaker, at the very onset, I want to state my support for Senator Mudama as the nominee to the PSC. Mr. Speaker, like has been said before by honorable colleagues with whom we served at the National Assembly previously, there is no doubt that Senator Mudama will bring in good experience and will bring in much needed familiarity with the systems that are working in this House. Mr. Speaker, Senator Mudama has served in important position previously, and one that is standing out as notable is that he was a vice chairman of KANU. He also served in the position of chairman of UDA, where I belong. Mr. Speaker, this tells you he's a person who can adapt to either side. Mr. Speaker, he has also served as a co-chair of the CORD NASA coalition, and now he served as chairman on the side of the government where we successfully ran this election to form the next government. This tells you he's an individual who can stay on either side and still perform to the highest level. Mr. Speaker, the Parliamentary Service Commission is one of the independent commissions that has been formed under Article 127 of the Constitution. And the caliber of people that we are taking there, Mr. Speaker, is of the highest possible in this nation. And looking at the CV of the Honorable Johnston Mudama, he fits the bill. But I want to emphasize one other thing. The age of Mheshimiwa Mudama gives us comfort that in case things go wrong or tempers are flaring, he will be the much needed stabilizing factor when decisions must be made, and maybe difficult decisions. Mr. Speaker, the function of PSC, one of the main functions is to run the National Assembly and the Senate efficiently and effectively. Mr. Speaker, as Honorable Mudama comes in, my expectation of him is that he will not come in as a senator or as a member of parliament. He will come in and look at us and look at the Parliamentary Service Commission from an outsider's eye. Why I say so, Mr. Speaker, is because when people look at the Parliamentary Service Commission, Mr. Speaker, there are many things that need to be looked at afresh, and I hope Senator Mudama We'll look at costing of services in Parliament. Mr. Speaker, whether we are getting value for the money in terms of the monies that are located here. Mr. Speaker, whether in fact the service providers, Mr. Speaker, if he can look and see whether they are balanced. For example, Mr. Speaker, Senator Muthama should tell us when he's serving there, how many service providers to this parliament, Mr. Speaker, are coming from Tana River County, Mr. Speaker. We would want to see him look and question things. Are the costings and the money we pay for running of this efficient? Is it effective? Are the services coming from all over the country? Mr. Speaker, I want Mr. Muthama, when he comes in as an honorable senator, to tell us what is the segregation or the number of people who are employed by PSC. How many of those, Mr. Speaker, are coming from Tana River County? And Mr. Speaker, is it fair? Are the distribution, are the numbers speaking to the equality and fairness and justice that Parliament should stand for? Mr. Speaker, he needs to look at things from outside. I pray that he will not just join in and sit and be part of the system that is established. Mr. Speaker, he should check and bring in fresh ideas, ask the hard questions. Mr. Speaker, these service providers, are they just Nairobi-centric? Or do we have some who are coming from other counties to reflect the reality of this Senate, the reality of the House in the National Assembly? Mr. Speaker, the employment opportunities, are they reflective of what should happen in the PSC? So, Mr. Speaker, we have this faith that because he's an old man and he's coming not as a senator, not as a member of parliament, but he's coming as an outsider, he will be able to give a fresh look to how PSC functions and whether it is within Article 127 of the Constitution as it should be. Otherwise, Mr. Speaker, I have interacted with Senator Muthama. I have full faith as an elder, as a friend, as a colleague. The way he steered the party, our party, to elections, the role he played, the energy he exhibited, Mr. Speaker, we have faith that he will do the same in the Parliamentary Service Commission. Mr. Speaker, I beg to support. I thank you.
Senator Veronica Maina.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this motion. Mr. Speaker, I rise to support the proposed appointment of Honorable Muthama as a nominee, external male nominee to the PSC. Mr. Speaker, I have had the opportunity to work very closely with Honorable Johnson Muthama at the party. He's the outgoing chairperson, and I was working as the SG until yesterday. And Mr. Speaker, I must vouch to the level of integrity that Honorable Muthama stood for during the nomination processes, his levels of competence, very good networking skills. He's a people person, Mr. Speaker. He traversed the whole country in the 47 counties. He traversed the whole country in the 47 counties, making sure that he has united all Kenyans under one cause. And Mr. Speaker, I witnessed a leader who did not have a bias based on the areas and the places, ethnic ethnic differences between people, a leader who did not regard those tendencies that other people would have. And Mr. Speaker, he brought people together. He was able to reconcile members when there were differences. And I can vouch that is bringing in competence to the Parliamentary Service Commission. Mr. Speaker, this morning, as we went through the hearing, the approval hearing of Honorable Johnson Muthama, We sought to know his understanding regarding whether Joint Services Board that is in Parliament was needed or was in conflict with any other institution, and he had a level of clarity of mind which is inspired, Mr. Speaker, by his earlier experience in this Parliament, Mr. Speaker, both at Senate and the National Assembly, Mr. Speaker. His tenure as a whip, as a majority whip, Mr. Speaker, is remembered by many people, even members of the public. When government was not losing motions that did not require to move, he was an efficient servant, Mr. Speaker, while he served. Mr. Speaker, on the question of oversight, we went into the depth, whether he understood the need for the oversight fund that the senators would need in order to be effective in their work and in their mandate under the Constitution. Mr. Speaker, on a first-hand basis, Honorable Johnston Muthama had experienced the difficulties and the challenges that senators have when they have to utilize their only salary, Mr. Speaker, to oversight whole counties in many constituencies. And he narrated, Mr. Speaker, how difficult it was for a senator to set up offices, which he had tried to do, to give members of public an opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to be able to bring their issues before his county offices and constituency offices, and those issues would then be propelled to Senate. It was clear, Mr. Speaker, from the interactions we had in the morning with Honorable Johnston Muthama, that without the oversight fund, it was not going to be effective for any senator, Mr. Speaker, who does not have extra funds except what is in the payslip to be able to effectively oversight any county. So, Mr. Speaker, he made a very clear case of Senate looking into the issues and PSC looking into the issues of how Senate can be more affirmed in terms of being given more resources to be able to perform their duties, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, Honorable Johnston Muthama came through as one who understood the relationship, the current relationship between the National Assembly and the Senate, especially on the issue of the flurry of litigation that has been horse-traded between the two houses. And Mr. Speaker, he came through as very clear that there was need now to settle that issue once and for all. And he was well equipped and ready to be able to push that mandate, Mr. Speaker. And the projects, Mr. Speaker, that have been pending before the PSC, Mr. Speaker, or on the PSC table, Mr. Speaker, he seemed very clear and conscious that there was now need to bring to accomplishment some of those projects that have been long-standing, either because they are not fully resourced or maybe because there was better need of utilization of whatever funds are allocated to projects that must benefit the current Parliament, Mr. Speaker. So I rise, Mr. Speaker, to say he's a man who has demonstrated patriotism, national unity. He is able to understand the devolution. He is able to understand rule of law and democracy and the need for participation of the people. So, Mr. Speaker, he meets the criteria set under Article 10, National Values and Principles of Good Governance. He meets that criterion, and he comes through as a personality that is minded of doing general good to the public, Mr. Speaker. And as I wind up, Mr. Speaker, it is notable that Honorable Muthama has engaged in a lot of charitable organization, has lifted people who are on the low end of life, Mr. Speaker, minded of their school fees, their need to be assisted through medical bills, Mr. Speaker, and he has a whole testimonial of how he has improved the lives of many Kenyans, Mr. Speaker. For these reasons, Mr. Speaker, and the many reasons that I've had espoused on the floor of this House, I beg to support this motion. Thank you.
Senator John Kenyua.
Asante Bwana Spika kwa kunipa fursa hii niweze kuchangia katika hoja iliyoletwa. Kwanza kabisa nasema ya kwamba naunga mkono kwa sababu Mudhama nimemjua, na Bwana Spika, wacha niseme ya kwamba pengine kama ningekuwa nimesikia haya mahojiano, ningekuwa nimesikia haya mawaidha yaliyopeanwa hapa yaliyoongewa na viongozi, ingenipa motisha hata zaidi wakati wa mahojiano kumjua zaidi. Nimemsikia Seneta Cheriot alivyosema, kiongozi walio wengi. Nimemsikiza Seneta Boni Halwale alivyosema, na Seneta Mungatana vile walivyofanya kazi na yeye kwa muda mrefu. Lakini Bwana Spika, mimi nimemjua Mudhama akiwa kama kiongozi wa chama cha UDA na mtu ambaye ni mzoefu sana katika masuala ya kisiasa. Bwana Spika, nilipokuwa katika harakati za uchaguzi nilienda kwake kumuuliza wasia wake katika mambo ya siasa, Bwana Spika, na nilimuona ni mtu aliye na ukomavu, mtu aliyebobea katika kazi yake, kwa sababu Bwana Spika, ukiongea na yeye anaongea kwa utaratibu, akiwa anajua mambo yale ambayo yanapaswa kulenga. Bwana Spika, kwa sababu yeye amekuwa kiongozi wa walio wachache na hata walio wengi katika muda tofauti tofauti, Bwana Spika, kwa hivyo mimi nataka kusema ya kwamba katika tume hii ya bunge, najua ya kwamba yeye atakuwa mtu ambaye ataleta mawiano, kwa sababu kuna viongozi wengi, lakini yeye najua kwa sababu yeye ni mtu ambaye ni mpole na aliye mzoefu, ataweza kuleta uongozi mwema. Na Bwana Spika, nataka kuambia jumba hili, yeye kwa sababu tumeongea na yeye na namjua yeye anaongea kuhusu Senate na chumba hili, kama vile mheshimiwa kiongozi wa wengi Cheriot alivyosema ya kwamba sisi pale katika tume, sisi ni kama tunangandamizwa kidogo, Bwana Spika. Sitaki kuongea mengi, Bwana Spika, kwa sababu nitamwaga mtama kwa kenye kuku wengi, kwa sababu sisi tayari tunajipanga pale na tunafanya mambo ambayo yataendelea kusaidia seneti. Na kwa sababu yeye amekaa katika seneti, alimalizia katika seneti, akawa ametoka kwa siasa akiwa hapa seneti, najua kwamba atakuwa katika kipao cha mbele kusaidia sisi kama maseneta, ndio tuweze shida tulizo nazo kidogo hapa katika seneti. Najua yatatusaidia tuweze kuchangia na shughuli nyingi zinazoongewa hapa, hasa shida za seneti. Najua yatatusaidia Bwana Spika kuziangazia kirefu na kipana. Kwa hivyo Bwana Spika, mimi nasimama kuunga mkono na kusema ya kwamba na mngoja katika tume tufanye kazi pamoja, na nataka kumhakikishia kwamba tutafanya kazi tukiwa kitu kimoja, kwa sababu umoja ni nguvu, utengano ni udhaifu. Asante Bwana Spika.
Senator Esi.
Asante sana Bwana Spika. Nami ningependa kuchangia kwa kuunga hoja hii ya uteuzi wa Mheshimiwa Mudhama. Ningependa kusema kuwa Mheshimiwa Mudhama amekuwa na uzoefu wa bunge na anajua mahitaji ya bunge hili. Amefanya kazi kwenye sekta ya biashara, amefanya siasa na amefanya kazi kwenye chama tawala ambacho ni cha UDA, ambapo mimi ni mmoja wao wenye chama hicho. Na katika kazi zetu kama vijana, wakati tulikuwa tunashughulika na mambo ya kutafuta kura huku na pale, niliweza kushirikiana naye kwa karibu, na ningependa kusema kuwa ni mtu ambaye ana roho ya kusaidia, hasa sisi kama vijana. Roho ya Mheshimiwa Mudhama katika mambo ya vijana ni kama baba ambaye anaangalia watoto wake. Kwa hivyo uteuzi wa Mheshimiwa Mudhama umekuja na wakati ambao unafaa, na tunatarajia kuwa atashirikiana na wenzao kwenye kamati hilo ili kusaidia bunge hili la seneti. Bwana Spika, tena nikisema kwa mwisho, uzoefu wa Mudhama kwenye biashara pia utachangia kamati hii ya bungeni, na sisi kama wabunge hapa tuna support uteuzi wake. Ningependa kuwa mfupi kwa hayo. Asante sana Bwana Spika.
Senator Cheptumo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was consulting on something else, and already I was on the line. Mr. Speaker, I would like to join my colleagues in supporting this motion. Mr. Speaker, I am a member of the Justice and Legal Affairs Committee, and this morning, Honorable Muthama appeared before the committee, and we had a very long engagement with him, Mr. Speaker, as a committee. And Mr. Speaker, I served with Honorable Muthama in the National Assembly, I think in the 10th Parliament. That time he served as the Chief Whip, and he was able to show leadership during his tenure as a whip. He was able to mobilize, and he was able, Mr. Speaker, to show a high level of leadership. Mr. Speaker, Muthama served as a member of this House, and he was able to express the suffering also he went through as a senator, that time when he was in this House. Mr. Speaker, the challenge we have in the Senate, as we all are aware, Mr. Speaker, is that we don't have the resources to execute our functions as senators in terms of oversight. And he gave an example, Mr. Speaker, of being the senator of Kitui, Machakos, with several constituencies. But the amount he was allocated, of course, as we all know, is equivalent to an allocation of a member of parliament. And it was very difficult for him to perform his function. In fact, he was able to actually spend his own resources to be able to serve his county in his time. Mr. Speaker, these are the challenges the House has today, and I have no doubt in my mind that having been in this House, Honorable Muthama shall be able, or will be able, Mr. Speaker, to advocate for that fairness and justice so that members of this House are able, Mr. Speaker, to perform their functions. Mr. Speaker, Honorable Muthama again was able to share about his personal life. Very successful businessman, dealing in chemstones, and he has been able to succeed in earning foreign currency for our country, Mr. Speaker. And so I see him as a man that is able to demonstrate that he has been able to succeed in business, he has been able to succeed in his political life. And so, Mr. Speaker, we have a man that is going to be useful in the Parliamentary Service Commission so that he is able to apply the experience he had in National Assembly and the experience he had in this House to be able to serve the two houses in a manner that is going to facilitate the members. In terms of Article 127, sub-Article 6 of the Constitution, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the other requirements that the law requires for him to fulfill before appointed as a commissioner, he was able to fulfill. All the reports from anti-corruption, EACC, reports from the intelligence service, reports from KRA, and all the other agencies, Mr. Speaker, we were able as a committee to satisfy ourselves that he's been able to fulfill. Apart from a situation where he has a matter pending in court, but Mr. Speaker, he was able to explain the circumstances of that particular case. Mr. Speaker, so in terms of him being able to demonstrate that he's a Kenyan who pays his taxes, who is actually able to set an example, even in leadership, in PSC, Mr. Speaker, as a committee, we were satisfied that he was able to fulfill the legal requirements and also the constitutional threshold required for him. And I think, Mr. Speaker, finally, as I conclude, Muthama was the chairman of the UDA, the party that I belong. And in this entire leadership as our chairman, Mr. Speaker, he was able to manage our resources. Mr. Speaker, prudence of managing resources, Mr. Speaker, is critical. There is no situation, and I think Senator Minor was able to also attest to that, that in their time when he was the chair of our party, there has been no situation where he has faced any challenge. Mr. Speaker, today, you enjoy a lot of respect, Mr. Speaker, because you served as a governor for 2 terms. The fact that Senator Muthama served in the National Assembly and also in this House and in various positions as explained by Honorable Mungatana, Mr. Speaker, is a confirmation that PSC will be lucky to draw from that experience, Mr. Speaker, and be able to be a very dynamic commission. Mr. Speaker, finally, the issue of fairness in the commission. Mr. Speaker, today, if you look at the staffing of the commission, and I think this was said by Honorable Mungatana here, the fairness. Mr. Speaker, we want a situation where, when they are staff to be employed, every county should be represented, so that we don't have a situation where the commissioners are the ones who are sharing those slots, Mr. Speaker, amongst themselves. They should be able to be fair, ensure that every county is represented as a share of those members to be employed. Mr. Speaker, that is the only way we are going to have a commission that is able to stand and be proud that it is serving the 2 houses and indeed the country. Mr. Speaker, I want to join my colleagues in supporting the appointment and the nomination of Muthama as a commissioner in the Public Service and Parliamentary Service Commission, and I believe it will add value to this commission, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Senator Osotsi.
Mr. Speaker, I am not willing to contribute to this debate because my leader, minority leader, has an issue to raise, which he'll be raising.
Senator Osotsi, if indeed you have nothing to say, don't queue in the system. Senator Chirange.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. From the onset, I want to support this motion and I think there is nothing much that can be said about Senator Johnston Muthama. He was our immediate former chairperson of UDA, which he has ceded that chairpersons to Governor Cecily Mbarire. I think talking about his CV, I've gone to the report. Mr. Speaker, we have an advantage as a Senate because he served with us. He understands the constraints that we go through, Mr. Speaker, in terms of discharging our mandate as per Article 96, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is a man during the campaign, he led us single-handedly, along all other leaders, including yourself, to ensure that Kenya Kwanza won the election and subsequently formed the government. Mr. Speaker, is a national leader. I would be cautious to say he's a Kamba leader, as my sister said. This is a national leader that we respect so much, his age, the track record that he has performed, Mr. Speaker, and despite from wherever he comes from, Mr. Speaker, we believe in the words of Martin Luther Jr. King, where all of us will be judged by the content of our character as opposed to who we are or we come from, Mr. Speaker. And I would have expected Senator Mahanzo, we had discussed with him to be very happy about this because he knows why, Mr. Speaker. Finally, Mr. Speaker, on Article 127, I think, Mr. Speaker, the issue of PSC is that Senate is unfairly represented, and I don't fear to contradict myself on that aspect. We remember in the last session, and there have been even, Mr. Speaker, The chairperson of PSC is the National Assembly Speaker, your counterpart, Senator Moses Masika Wetangula. One of our representatives is also the clerk of the Senate, Mr. Speaker, who is the secretary to the commission, and that is Mr. Jeremiah Nyegenya, Mr. Speaker. And we are aware by imaginations by individuals within National Assembly who wanted to water down of the powers of the clerk of the Senate, who is a member of who is a secretary to the PSC, Mr. Speaker. And we are aware of those imaginations because their intention is to make PSC one-man show in favor of the National Assembly, Mr. Speaker. But the Constitution is very clear. Whether you want to legislate the PSC Act the way you want, but the Constitution remains that the secretary of the PSC is the clerk of the Senate. And I want to advise my brothers and sisters in the National Assembly, they will gain nothing by ensuring that they try and water down and create other offices that try to water down the secretary to the PSC, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and I think other members like 7 we have elected, and I don't know why it is good minority side are back in the House, and I can see my lawyer, Commissioner Okongo Mugeni. I have never understood, and this is my plea to the minority leadership, led by Minority Leader, Mr. Speaker, my brother, Senator Stewart Manzayo, that in future, as the way majority side we do, Mr. Speaker, can you also kindly send 2 representatives? In this side of the majority, we send 2 representatives. The next time is to ensure from the minority side, probably Senator Okongo Mugeni, Mr. Speaker, and another, even a lady. I can see there are many ladies from minority side, so that we achieve balance of power, Mr. Speaker, when we are in the PSC, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the role of PSC, and that is why I want to emphasize Article 127. Mr. Speaker, can you believe there are members of Parliament, Mr. Speaker, who are squatting? They don't have offices.
Refer to me
but
as
Article
Madam
127.
Speaker. Madam Speaker.
Oh, sorry, Madam Speaker. And congratulations, you used to be our SG, and we wish you well in your future endeavors, Madam Speaker. Article 127, subsection 6, gives the power Parliamentary Service Commission to provide facilities to members, Madam Speaker. Up to now, there are members of National Assembly and the Senate who are still squatting, Madam Speaker, on corridors or protection house, on KICC, and many others, Mr. Speaker, even in corridors of Parliament that do not have the offices, Mr. Speaker. These facilities must be provided for by the PSC. Our members must be ensured, Madam Speaker. Another point I want to make, and you know even KICC, Madam Speaker, where some of us have offices for some time, we are living with cockroaches. Sometimes you are in the office and a number of cockroaches, and millions of them show up, Madam Speaker. There are no lights on corridors. The toilets are in pathetic state. In fact, somebody who lives in Korogosho or other places are having better toilets than what we're having in KICC. There is no water. There is no well lit, Madam Speaker. It impairs the discharge of our services, Madam Speaker. And therefore, the PSC, and I want to, it is good that we have members here, and Senator Mudama, Madam Speaker, that we must be treated, even the safety, Madam Speaker. There are strangers that are roaming around our offices without a proper accreditation, that the facility should be put in place, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, finally on the issue of SRC, why is it that PSC is behaving as it is under the SRC? And Senator Okongo Mugeni, before we elected him as the commissioner, had even challenged the Gazette notice at that point before this floor of the House. Why is it that the PSC is behaving as if it is under SRC? And yet SRC and PSC are creation of the Constitution, Mr. Speaker. I know the change of the seat, Mr. Speaker, sir. Why is it that, and that is why many problems that members of Parliament are facing is because it is creation of SRC. So we want to encourage, we want to challenge, we want to besiege, we want to give them ile mate ya baraka to PSC, Mr. Speaker, so that they go and don't allow SRC to blackmail and intimidate you. Why do you fear SRC? SRC are issuing left, right, and center. You saw the SRC chair, Mr. Speaker, that she was giving herself 10 million car grant, and members of Parliament were given 6 million, Mr. Speaker, sir. In fact, the SRC should be made a part-time commission, because they don't have any business, because the review of salaries is provided under the law, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, I challenge the PSC, don't be intimidated, don't behave as if SRC are up, you are down. You should work from up and down, Mr. Speaker, and that is why we need to, and finally on parliamentary democracy, I think they are doing very well. We, as per Article 118, we want to encourage the PSC to promote this parliamentary democracy. We have seen they are building CPS team, current Mr. Speaker, sir, and therefore we are very proud of what you are doing in terms of promoting parliamentary democracy, bill tracking that we are seeing online, the facilities that members are enjoying, even the water that we are seeing. We note even, we want to challenge the Secretariat biannually, Mr. Speaker, sir, to be providing us with the constitution, the documentation, and update of this iPad, Mr. Speaker, sir, so that it becomes easy. Even I can see there is a lot of catalog of laws. We should find a way, Mr. Speaker, sir, to provide in our offices the catalog of these laws, so that these tedious with the COVID, after COVID, Mr. Speaker, sir, why would we be seeing this big catalog of laws? And Mr. Speaker, I'm sure where you are seated, you have been well resourced online so that it becomes easy and ensure. And even, Mr. Speaker, on that point is that the also provision of internet, especially to our offices. Mr. Speaker, the internet that we have in our offices is behaving like Kenya Power. They disappear and come back at the will. So who is the provider of Wi-Fi, Mr. Speaker? And we are not using Wi-Fi to watch TikTok. We are using Wi-Fi to do research and enrich the issues that we present before the floor of the House, Mr. Speaker, sir. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, alongside Senator Johnson Mutama, yourself, Senator Wetangula, Moses Musalia Mudavadi, the President himself, William Ruto, Rigiji, and others, we as members of majority side, we have to support Senator Mudama. And he must go to be a PSC commissioner, but when we want him to go there to serve everybody, regardless of what they believe in, where they come from, Mr. Speaker. Other issues I don't want to say on the floor of the House, we can reserve to the Speaker's Kamukunji, but to support this motion and wish the PSC Parliamentary Service Commission all the best as they serve us and ensure that our welfare is a top priority so that we discharge for the benefit of many Kenyans. Mr. Speaker, with those very, very remarks, and of course with the staff, Mr. Speaker, we note, I almost forgot that, allow me just a second, is that we also, PSC, Mr. Speaker, to ensure also our staff are well catered for, so that they are able to assist us because they are our own, Mr. Speaker. Even yourself, these staff are doing a good job. They are ensuring that we are well resourced in terms of research, in terms of provision of services. So even PSC also, we are not saying they should only push for the agenda of members of parliament. They must include the staff so that the staff are well resourced and be able to support us to discharge the mandate that our people gave us before the House. With those very, very remarks, Mr. Speaker, to congratulate and wish Senator Sifuna all the best. I can see today sitting on the Deputy Minority Whip seat. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Maanzo Daniel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to support the appointment of Senator Mudama. Senator Mudama is a long colleague of mine, and even at one time I was his lawyer when he was at the National Assembly and got into trouble and found himself with the Pangani 6. Senator Mudama was very instrumental in formation of ODM Kenya, and he was elected into National Assembly and later on became a senator. So he understands what happens in the National Assembly side and understands what happened in Senate side. Mr. Speaker, we have one big problem I believe Parliamentary Service Commission is going to sort out. The office of Senate, and especially when you go to the county, it's surprising that the other government offices exist. When I was a member of parliament, I was able to construct an office of a member of parliament in the middle of the constituency. Now I have to go and rent somewhere at a shop or something like that, and we have a huge budget where Parliamentary Service Commission spends. And I believe Senator Mudama, who understands these things, we should be able to come up with a budget whereby instead of paying rent, we can construct an office for the senator in the headquarters of the county. And I believe that's a challenge Parliamentary Service Commission can be able to handle, can have a budget online on it, and the senators could have offices where Kenyans represented by senators could access. And I believe Senator Muthama, being a person who deals with real estate and properties, will be very instrumental to the commission to be able to give these ideas so that we have facilitated better to serve Kenyans and to serve the people who have elected us to represent them. And I believe Senator Muthama, understanding and having gone through a similar experience, and having understood also how the National Assembly operates, he also is a senior citizen of this country and therefore commands the respect necessary at the Parliamentary Service Commission to be able to drive through some of these issues we have. He's also from my community, and he's one of the persons who was very instrumental when I was forming ODM Kenya, and I was his chair, and has buttressed the foundations of politics in this Kenya. Later on, the party became Wiper, and it's the third biggest party in the country. Therefore, having been person who formed that, and later on went on into other parties, I'm still expecting him back one day as a permanent member, because he was a permanent member of ODM Kenya and subsequently Wiper Democratic Party. So I support him. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Kisang.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I arise to support the motion for nomination of Senator Muthama as a member of Parliamentary Service Commission. Muthama has been in this house. He was the first minority whip in the 11th Parliament. And before that, he was the vice chair of KANU. He has led several businesses. And recently, for the last 5 years or so, the last three or 2.5 years, he's been the chair of UDA until yesterday. I believe the reason why he resigned yesterday was so that when he's appointed as a commissioner of Parliamentary Service Commission, he serves this house and the other house impartially, so that he is not aligned to any political party when he serves as a commissioner. Honorable Speaker, when you check on the suitability, Honorable Muthama is suitable to be a commissioner in this house because of the experience he has. He was a member of National Assembly in the 10th Parliament, 11th Parliament as a senator, and he served well. I believe when he comes now here as a non-member of Parliament, a commissioner non-member of Parliament, is going to ensure he brings checks and balances, because we know, Honorable Speaker, there are many things that are not going right in the Parliamentary Service Commission, especially SRC. Every 4.5 or 5 years, they come in with different salaries, and they just ensure they release those things just before election. So Honorable Muthama needs to bring in the knowledge that he has as a business person and as a seasoned politician. Honorable Speaker, we've said that there are many members of Parliament, both Senate and National Assembly, who don't have offices. In fact, I had been allocated a very tiny office in KICC, but I refused to move there. But thank you, because I think I got a good office now at the Red Cross. But we are waiting. The tower has been on since the 10th Parliament. So I hope Honorable Muthama, as soon as he reports, he'll sit with the other commissioners, to ensure they fast-track completion and equipping of these modern offices so that members can move in, can enjoy those offices and work, have good internet. You've seen people complaining that the internet is very poor. We're in the city, in the middle of the capital, and there is Wi-Fi. There is a fiber optic across here. So we believe fiber optic should be supplied to all the offices so that internet being slow or dropping should be something of the past. It should be something of the past, so that at least we can do research. Our employees can do research for us, so that when we come to this house, we're able to contribute meaningfully, and also with information that is up to date. So, Honorable Speaker, I wish Honorable Muthama well, as he gets appointed, as he is approved by this House and the other House, so that he can serve us. He can serve us as soon as possible. Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I wish him well.
Honorable Senators, there being no other senator wishing to contribute to this motion, I call upon the mover to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As I reply to this particular motion, I first of all want to support the sentiments and the accolades that the honorable members who've spoken to the motion about the Honorable Senator Johnson Muthama. Mr. Speaker, the nominee whom we had a session earlier on in the morning with is indeed a national leader. He is experienced. He's done over 30 years in leadership, both in the National Assembly, at the Senate, and in other positions of leadership in this country, and therefore he fits the bill to serve as a commissioner in the Parliamentary Service Commission. Mr. Speaker, sir, the Honorable Muthama steered, as the members who've talked before me confirmed, that he steered the ruling party, that is the United Democratic Alliance, to win the election of the 2022 until when he resigned just the other day in order to facilitate his appointment as a member of the Parliamentary Service Commission to serve the people of Kenya in that capacity, and also to serve members of this House as a non-member of Parliament commissioner in the Parliamentary Service Commission. Mr. Speaker, in his steering the party to the success, we recall that the Honorable Senator Muthama had an opportunity to manage pre-election and post-election coalition. He depicted a character of a leader without borders. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Muthama, from his CV that was shared with the committee and with the Kenyans, he fits to be a qualified and excellent member of this Parliamentary Service Commission. Having been in this House, Mr. Speaker, he came out to be an experienced leader who understands not only the challenges that the Parliamentary Service Commission has had between the two houses. We are aware that the National Assembly and the Senate have had various challenges, which from the experience and the exchanges that we had in our session with the nominee, Mr. Speaker, he showed the capability of a committed leader, a committed member, and a commissioner who will, without blemish, serve the interest of this House. Having served here, Mr. Speaker, I know he understood and he will steer the interest not only of the public that he serves, but also of the House, that is the Senate. My colleagues have talked about the Parliamentary Service Act, and indeed the same act requires of this House to vet or to subject a nominee to a process of approval. Yet the same act was never passed through this House as is required by Article 110 of the Constitution. And indeed, Mr. Speaker, and for the benefit of the honorable members, the Court of Appeal in its finding at paragraph 178 of the judgment indeed declared that the Parliamentary Service Act ought to have passed through the Senate because it affects the operations, the mandate of both houses, that is the Senate and the National Assembly. And I believe that with the experience of the Honorable Senator Johnson Muthama in this House and in other leadership positions, he will steer the interest of this House and ensures that the mandate as provided for under the Constitution is served within the 4 tenets of the Constitution. Mr. Speaker, members have confirmed the qualification and the experience of the honorable nominee, and as a committee, I would like to confirm and thank the members for the effort, for the commitment, and for the purpose that they put into the process which we undertook, leading to the presentation of the report, which this motion is seeking to be approved in order to have the Honorable Johnson Muthama nominated as a member of the Parliamentary Service Commission who we believe and expect will serve the people of Kenya with utmost good faith, commitment, and integrity. Mr. Speaker, I want to end by saying I want to ask the House to pass this motion in unison in order to ensure that the Parliamentary Service Commission is fully constituted. I reply and thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Senators, I do now proceed to put the question, which is that the Senate adopts the report of the Standing Committee on Justice, Legal Affairs and Human Rights on the proposed appointment of the Honorable Johnson Muthama as a Commissioner of the Parliamentary Service Commission, laid on the table of the Senate today, Tuesday, 28th February 2023, and pursuant to Article 127 2D of the Constitution, Section 9(2) of the Parliamentary Service Act, and Standing Order 773, approve the appointment of Honorable Johnson Muthama as a Commissioner of the Parliamentary Service Commission. Will as many as of that opinion say aye? Aye. Will as many as of the contrary opinion say nay? The ayes have it. Next order. Honorable Senators, before we move to the next order, kindly allow me to make the following communication. Honorable Senators, I would wish to acknowledge the presence in the Speaker's Gallery this afternoon, a visiting delegation from the Gambia National Assembly Authority. The delegation comprises leadership of the National Assembly of Gambia, who are on a 5-day study tour in the Senate. Honorable Senators, I request each member of the delegation to stand when called out so that you may be acknowledged in the Senate tradition. The Honorable Fabakri Tomboko Jatta, the Speaker of the National Assembly of the Gambia. Honorable Alhagi S. Dabo, Minority Leader and Member of the Authority. The Honorable Alhagi Mbo, Member of the Authority. The Honorable Maimuna Sesi, Member of the Authority. Mr. Mamadou A. Sise, Clerk of the National Assembly of the Gambia. Mr. Gibairu Jane, Director, Communications, ICT and Press. Ms. Sally Seka, Principal Accountant. Ms. Justina Graywood, Principal Administrative Officer, Office of the Speaker. Mr. Osman F.T. Jatta, Personal Assistant to the Honorable Speaker. Ms. Clara Mtanda, Associate Program Officer, International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance. On behalf of the Senate and on my own behalf, I extend a warm welcome and wish you a fruitful visit. Honorable Senators, also, I wish to acknowledge the presence in the Speaker's Gallery this afternoon, a visiting delegation from the County Assembly of Makueni. The delegation comprises staff from the Sergeant-at-Arms Department who are in the Senate on a 4-day benchmarking visit with the counterpart department in the Senate. Honorable Senators, I request each member of the delegation to stand when called out so that you may be acknowledged in the Senate tradition. 1, Leonard Ndwala, Sergeant-at-Arms. Christine Mwendo, Sergeant-at-Arms. Benedict Mutua, Assistant Sergeant-at-Arms. Aleol Wambua, Assistant Sergeant at Arms. Josephat Kimanthi, Assistant Sergeant at Arms. And lastly, Felista Matheka, Assistant Sergeant at Arms. On behalf of the Senate and on my own behalf, I extend a warm welcome and wish you a fruitful visit. Honorable Senators, I will allow the majority side to make remarks in welcoming the two delegations, and thereafter I will also give the minority side an opportunity to welcome the two delegations. Minority Leader, proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, allow me to join you in welcoming the visitors who have come all the way from Gambia. Gambia is a very nice country and part of us in Africa. Mr. Speaker, I hope that by coming all the way from Gambia to Kenya, our brothers and sisters are going to learn how we conduct our business here. This is the Senate, this is the upper house, and as you can see, we normally have a bipartisan kind of a relationship here to debate issues. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, I don't want to spend so much time. I would like to also extend a big karibuni nyumbani. Senate ni nyumba yenu. And I believe you have enjoyed your stay. You've learned. We have very capable sergeants here and very senior ones. For that matter. And I believe you will be in a position to learn
Minority
so
Leader,
much from them.
You know very well that under the standing orders, if you choose to speak English, you stick to that language.
Yes, yes, yes. I've taken back. Mr. Speaker, finally, I want to say karibuni. Karibuni is a word that can be used in both English and Swahili. I thank you so much, Mr. Speaker.
Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to welcome the visiting delegation from the Parliament of Gambia. Though I have never visited Gambia, Mr. Speaker, I have many Gambian friends who do business and actually work in Kericho. They are led by a gentleman called Mr. Jibi Chor, who has been with us in the county that I represent in this house for quite a while. So I feel a special connection to the visiting team. I hope they get full value of their time in the Republic of Kenya. They get to learn and interact with members of parliament. To the best of my knowledge, Mr. Speaker, their parliament is pretty much almost similar to ours, both in structure and size, and therefore their pick and choice of Kenya and the Kenyan parliament as a place to undertake their study and comparison is most welcome. Mr. Speaker, I also wish to congratulate them because they live up to the spirit of what I have chosen to advocate the last few months as majority leader. As Africans, Mr. Speaker, there are many members in this House, both now and previously, in Senate and in the National Assembly, who can barely name 5 African capital cities that they visit, yet in Europe, they know every street by name. That is extremely embarrassing, and we have said, Mr. Speaker, that this time, let us buy Africa, build Africa, travel in Africa, get to know Africa, we make our continent better. Thank you, the Gambian team, for making that a true spirit and a true example. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Osotsi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this chance to also welcome the guests from Makueni County Assembly and from Gambia Parliament. Mr. Speaker, Gambia is a key country to Kenya though it's in the western part of Africa, but it's a country that we can learn a lot from, and they can learn a lot from us. Mr. Speaker, allow me to specially recognize my good friend, Honorable Alhaji, who is Vice Chair of African Parliamentary Network on Internet Governance. It is a caucus that brings together members of parliament across Africa on matters of internet governance. Mr. Speaker, you know internet is a key asset in global communication and interaction. And Mr. Alhaji is one of the founders of that network. He has worked very hard alongside other members to promote the spirit of Pan-Africanism and connectivity in Africa. We encourage members to also pay a lot of interest on caucuses at the continental level, like APNIC, so that we achieve the goals that we want to achieve as an African continent. Mr. Speaker, I welcome the County Assembly of Makueni as well to come and learn how we do our work here so that they can make our county assemblies stronger, like this Senate and the National Assembly. Welcome to the Senate of Kenya. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Ledama.
Mr. Speaker, I thank you. Mr. Speaker, let me begin by welcoming the delegation from Gambia. Gambia is similar to my country of Narok, where there are a lot of wildlife, and I know tourism is one of your main foreign income earners. I want to encourage you when you're here to visit Narok County, visit the Masai Mara Game Reserve, and hopefully you'll get a chance to see sister leopards and like the ones for Gambia. Your culture, when it comes to the issue of music, is something which I really admire. I have an affinity to the music industry in Gambia, and it's something that really helps. I've always wanted to travel to the Gambia, and I hope that when I'm doing my trip of West Africa, Gambia and Senegal are two of the countries that I really admire to be able to go and interact with the people. To our visitors from Makueni, let me begin by congratulating Governor Mutula Kilonzo for winning his petition today. You're very lucky. You have a good governor. He was one of us, very diligent. I hope that you will support him with the county assembly. You will also be able to oversight him and also encourage and support devolution so that we can be able to grow. We are living in very interesting times when there are many challenges. Right now, Makueni, if you look at the entire Lower Eastern, Machakos, Kitui, if you look at Kajiado, Narok, we're all been hit hard by the drought. I hope that we can be able to sit down and maybe at the assembly, you can encourage your colleagues to look at this issue of the water from an alteration. I thank you for coming, and I hope that when you go back to Gambia and when you go back to Makueni, you'll be able to share what you learn from this Senate. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Senators, before we move to the next order, I've got further communications to make. Honorable Senators, as you're all aware, the second session of the 13th Parliament began on 14th February 2023. This came after first session that was largely characterized by the swearing in of honorable members, orientation and induction sessions that are intended to facilitate senators to acclimatize to parliamentary customs, rules and traditions, as well as to equip members with the skills and competencies for parliamentary work. We began the second session with an already full plate. This was mentioned by the Senate Majority Leader in a statement to the House pursuant to Standing Order 57-1 that highlighted 16 bills that are in our entry as well as motions, some of which are critical to the budget process and which have a major bearing on the management and operation of our counties. Majority Leader, have your seat, please. Honorable Senators, the proceedings in the Senate in the past 2 weeks have deprived us of the opportunity to pass critical legislation and may have the potential to deny the Senate the opportunity to pass important motions within the timelines provided in the statutes and the standing orders. The last 2 weeks also witnessed an unprecedented series of events in the Senate that have made it necessary for me to make this communication. During this time, there was display of defiance and disrespect to the chair that is alien to the conduct expected of a senator. The directions of the chair were ignored and some senators conducted themselves in the most dishonorable manner. How will the Senate remain of good standing, deliver on the aspiration of the people, and protect the interests of counties and their governments if we do not maintain the confidence and trust that the public have bestowed upon us? Honorable Senators, as your Speaker, I'm deeply concerned with the state of affairs in the chamber in the first few sittings and the abuse of privilege by some senators in the August House. Even when one is not pleased with the directives of the Speaker or the Chair, as will sometimes happen, there are better ways of addressing grievances than resorting to outright disorder. The standing orders provide a framework for debate and order in the House. The Senate leadership has made concerted efforts to ensure that you're well versed with the standing orders, and at every opportune time, the Chair has urged senators to observe and apply standing orders. I say this with particular reference to parts 18 and 20 of the standing orders that touch on the rules of debate and order in the Senate and in committees. I continue to urge all of us, senators, to acquaint themselves with these provisions. They are at the core of orderly, smooth, predictable transaction of business in the Senate. Allow me, honorable senators, to reiterate what constitutes disorderly conduct and gross disorderly conduct, pursuant to Standing Orders 121 and 122, respectively. Among other things, the standing orders provide that a senator is disorderly if that senator, 1, creates disorder, 2, knowingly raises false points of order, unnecessarily interrupts proceedings or consults in a disruptive manner, makes allegations without, in the Speaker's opinion, adequate substantiation, or defies a ruling or direction of the Speaker or chairperson of a committee, demonstrates or makes disruptive utterances against the suspension of a named senator, disrupts or attempts to disrupt the Speaker's procession, and lastly, commits any other breach of these standing orders that, in the opinion of the Speaker, constitutes gross disorderly conduct. Honorable Senators, Standing Orders 121-2 and 122-2 provide the consequences of creating disorder and gross disorder in the Senate. In the first instance, the disorderly conduct, the Speaker may call a senator whose conduct is disorderly to order, and either caution the senator or order the senator to withdraw from the premises of the Senate for the remainder of the day's sitting. In second instances of gross disorderly conduct, the Speaker shall order the senator to withdraw immediately from the premises of Parliament, A, on the first occasion, for a maximum of 3 sitting days, including the sitting day of suspension, and B, on the second or subsequent occasion, during the same session, for a maximum of 7 sitting days and a maximum of 21 sitting days, including the day of suspension. Now, honorable senators, we owe it to our forebearers who established the Senate as an institution of order, decorum, and amicable debate, and as dignified chamber. To maintain it as such, leaders lead by example. And if we are to be the pace setters, For the many Kenyans who look upon the Senate and the counties that see hope in us, we have the solemn duty to conduct ourselves in a dignified manner, rise to the occasion to better legislators, and uphold the provisions of the standing orders in our conduct in both plenary and the committee meetings. Honorable Senators, let it go on record that a recurrence of this kind of disorder that was witnessed in the Senate in the past 2 weeks shall not, repeat, shall not be tolerated. As your Speaker, and indeed the entire Speakers panel, we shall discharge our duties without fear or favor when it comes to dealing with disorder, irrespective of where it emanates from. It may emanate from the government side, it may emanate from the minority side. Honorable Senators, kindly stand guided accordingly. I thank you. Next order. Senator Mazayo, what is your point of order?
Mr. Speaker, before you left last week, there was a communication you were supposed to give to the House with regards to the leadership of the minority side. Mr. Speaker, there was a sudden departure on your part, and said we didn't understand what was happening. And in the afternoon, I think your deputy came and took over the House, which we understand. Mr. Speaker, in case you leave for a trip or elsewhere, or you're committed elsewhere, we understand. When your deputy takes over, he actually assumes the powers of the Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when your deputy was sitting on that chair, I don't know whether he acted with your instructions or outside your instructions. Because number one, there was that communication you're supposed to deliver, which you had promised that you're going to deliver in the afternoon. And secondly, he seemed not to be aware I thank you, Speaker. He seemed not to be aware that there was communication to be made. So, Mr. Speaker, that is what brought all the hell loose here. Mr. Speaker, finally, what I want to say is, now that you're back, and now you're in charge, this question of communicating, our communication to your office, has not yet been done. Could you be kind enough to communicate on the communication with regards to the leadership of the minority side? We are being suffocated on this side, Mr. Speaker, for lack of leadership. Because I stand alone, the rest with my deputy. But I don't have a whip, I don't have a deputy whip. As I've already communicated to you, with regards to these changes, would you be kind enough, now that you're back to your chair, as the Speaker of this House, communicate to us with regards to the changes of the leadership that I placed before you? I thank you.
Senator Mandago, what is your point of order?
My point of order, Mr. Speaker, is in reference to Standing Order 101. Is the minority leader in order to mention the names of the Deputy Speaker and cast aspersion in his conduct sitting as the chair and the Speaker of the Senate in your absence, Mr. Speaker?
You'll have the opportunity to speak, Senator Sifuna. Let me just dispense with the point of order by Senator Mandago and Senator Mazayo. Honorable Minority Leader, you've been in this Senate longer than most of the senators in this House. The Speaker, the Deputy, and the Speaker's panel, any member who sits on this chair exercise the powers of the Speaker. And I remember the Honorable Senator of Nairobi defining the word Speaker to include the Deputy and the members of the panel. So let us not split hair. The Deputy Speaker, while sitting on this chair, was exercising the powers of the Speaker of the House at that particular juncture. And whatever he said, whatever he ruled, is deemed to be the ruling of the chair and is binding. I cannot sit in appeal or sit in review of an order that was made by the Deputy Speaker or any member of the Speaker's panel. So if indeed there was a ruling that was made by my deputy, that is the ruling of the chair. And I'm not in a position, pursuant to our standing orders, to disturb that ruling. And indeed, going to what Senator Mandago has raised in a point of order, Minority Leader, you cannot certainly discuss the conduct of the Deputy Speaker. The Standing Order 101, as quoted by Senator Mazayo, is very clear. The Deputy Speaker was sitting as the Speaker. He ruled as the Speaker, not a lesser Speaker. And therefore, we abide by the rulings made by the Deputy Speaker, if there are any rulings that are made, unless I'm told no ruling was made. But if there was a ruling that was made, then that ruling is binding. I cannot disturb it. What's your point of order, Senator Sifuna?
Mr. Speaker, first let me say that I am personally glad that you are back on that seat as a substantive Speaker of this House. Because, and I'm happy with the last thing that you've said about the powers of the Deputy Speaker and members of the Speaker's panel. Because, Mr. Speaker, the person who made it an issue was the person who then was sitting on that seat. We, in fact, made the argument that there cannot be business that is brought before the House that then we are told has to wait for the substantive Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the problem we find ourselves in is that the matter of the communication, and the Hansard will bear me witness, the matter of the communication of the changes in the leadership of the minority side, we were told here that that communication has to wait for the substantive Speaker. And in fact, if you look at the Hansard proceedings of that day, Mr. Speaker, you will remember me asking the question, if indeed a matter as simple as a communication cannot be made by a person other than the substantive Speaker, then really no one else would have the power to transact any other business, because in my view, communications such as the ones you've made about the people who are, or the visitors we had in the gallery, is a matter so simple and straightforward that it doesn't have to wait for the substantive Speaker. Mr. Speaker, having listened to you this afternoon, first of all, I, as a senator elected to this House, I am ashamed of the things that have happened in the past 2 weeks. And I bear that shame together with all the members of this Senate. Mr. Speaker, we came here to discuss substantive matters that affect the people of Kenya.
And if we are going to address what the significant difference is between the first session that we had as a House and this particular session, Speaker, we must go to the root cause of all the events of the past 2 weeks. It is not enough for us to be admonished, to be told we are behaving unruly or in conduct that is not in line with the standing of a member of this Senate. We as a House must ask ourselves, and I asked this question last week, what happened to the collegiate nature of the debate that we used to have in this particular House in the first session, Mr. Speaker? And if you were following those proceedings, our position has remained that in fact the Speaker of this House has no role whatsoever in dealing with the matter of a communication in the changes of the leadership of the minority or indeed the majority side. Mr. Speaker, we have come to this particular juncture because of a matter that in our view is a very straightforward matter. The minority have made a decision to change their leadership. All that we are waiting for is this communication. Mr. Speaker, we have likened this to a soccer game between Gor Mahia and AFC. And when the coach for AFC stands up to make a substitution, the referee in the game says you cannot make that substitution. Mr. Speaker, it is absurd because we want to be able to respect the rules of this House. Our greatest frustration, Mr. Speaker, is when we see the application of these rules being selective, Mr. Speaker. So it would not offend me, Mr. Speaker, for instance, if somebody misconducted themselves and I saw fair application of the rules. Mr. Speaker, we are very serious people. We have very serious agenda here. As a senator of Nairobi, this morning, Mr. Speaker, I saw my traders from Nyamakima. They were in the streets, Mr. Speaker, exercising their rights under Article 37 to demonstrate peacefully about the invasion of the Chinese into even the retail market in this country. They wanted to present me with this petition so that I can come and canvass these matters here, because that is why they elected me. But we are stuck in this circular motion because the last time, if I remember correctly, Mr. Speaker, we even thought that there was some middle ground, that there was some truce that was reached between the leadership of the minority and the leadership of the majority. In fact, people apologized here, Mr. Speaker, for the conduct of that particular session. And our expectation was, because terms of a truce, Mr. Speaker, must be observed. I was not in that meeting, and the meeting was expressed to have been a meeting in your office. But, Mr. Speaker, what we are wondering is what has happened to that spirit that was here on Thursday last week. Because we expected that now the matter of the communication would be addressed. Mr. Speaker, I don't want to go beyond that because I would like to give other colleagues opportunity for them to also address themselves to this matter. But, Mr. Speaker, please let us address the root cause of this problem, and you will not see any sort of misconduct from any side if this matter, the root of the matter, is addressed, Mr. Speaker. I thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cheptumo. What's your point of order?
Mr. Speaker, I want to appreciate the submission by my learned colleague. But, Mr. Speaker, it appears to me that is challenging the very decision that we have made, the direction we have given. Mr. Speaker, you are not, I think I have to allow the Speaker to console.
Proceed, Senator Cheptumo.
Because, Mr. Speaker, when you are away, the direction given by the chair then was that he was not giving the communication because he had been stopped by a court order, not because the substantive speaker was not present. I think, Mr. Speaker, that is really the way I understood that time. So I think my colleague is misleading the House that the communication was not given because the substantive speaker was not present. It is because there was a court order that actually stopped the speaker from issuing the communication. Mr. Speaker, I think that is the true position as at the time when the matter came before the House.
What's your point of order, Senator Ledama?
Mr. Speaker, let me begin by thanking you for making that communication. And I think it's about time that we set matters straight. I want to comment on your communication, maybe just react to it in a very civil and polite manner. You've indicated, which I completely agree with you, that this House shall be guided by the standing orders. Mr. Speaker, I want to request you to abide by that onwards so that we can be able to make progress. I'm happy that you referred to Article 107 of the Constitution that gives authority, or your authority as the main speaker, to anyone else seated in your seat. We have an issue that relates to the minority side. I think, Mr. Speaker, if we are being true to ourselves, then I would beseech you to look back into the standing orders so that the standing orders do not end up becoming a sword that only cuts one side. The sword should be, if it is used for both sides, if the standing orders are quite clear and they are explicit in terms of what should follow, then that should be the case. The main bone of contention, Mr. Speaker, has been on standing order number 23. The other main issue has been on issue sub judice. These are the two matters that this House has pronounced itself more than once on what should ensue. So, Mr. Speaker, following on your communication, I'd like to beseech you to re-examine everything that has happened here. Yes, today you found it, fit to reprimand us for our behavior. And being very polite, I would say the standing orders have been drafted to guide this House. It will be very unfair if the standing orders will only be used to reprimand any senator who complains, but when a matter is completely explicit, it's overlooked. So, Mr. Speaker, now that you're back, I'd like to invite you to relook at the standing order, particularly standing order number 23, and look at the communication that was given by the minority side, and then give us a way forward so that we can be able to put this matter to rest. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Sampson.
Mr. Speaker, while I agree with the minority side that within the standing order, purview of standing order number 23, Mr. Speaker, there is a process in which they can change their leadership, and it is within their purview as minority. What I don't agree is that when they do not want to follow the rule of law. Because last week, Mr. Speaker, whether you were there or the Deputy Speaker, the office of Speaker subsists. There was directions that were given that was a court order. And in fact, Senator Sifuna and I think Senator Otsotsi indicated on issues of political parties tribunal, that is where they thrive. And they assured before, and you can check the answer, they assure the House that they will go back and ensure they resolve that issue within political parties tribunal on the issue of change of their leadership position, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, it was within your right to reprimand, because I remember even when I was walking on the corridor, Mr. Speaker, sir, I don't know how can I put my colleagues who are even removing the name of Senator Fatuma Dulo at the door of the minority whip, yet they want you to follow the same law. The law is a double-edged sword. If you want the Speaker to rule and give a decision on a particular issue on change of leadership, Mr. Speaker, I beseech my colleagues in the minority side, Mr. Speaker, sir, and it's being read by Senator Stewart Matzaya and my prayerful friends, the Deputy Senator Wambua Kio, that let us follow what the standing order and the law says. Because last week we subjected this Senate to unnecessary ridicule. I remember even and my colleagues who we served in the last Senate, including Senator Ledama, We even had a more contentious issue that was on issue of revenue formula. But the House, Mr. Speaker, sir, did not degenerate up to the level as the Speaker. You are reprimanding the House. Yet that one was more emotive because we were discussing about revenue. We had even, I'm not saying on this issue of minority leadership, we should have a bipartisan approach because it is the issue of the minority side. It is within their purview. But we ended up, Mr. Speaker, agreeing on the issue of revenue formula, which was very contentious then. And I know most of colleagues who had not joined us then were also following those deliberations, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to appeal to the minority side. They should not force you to communicate on their change of leadership. And we say it in conclusion, Mr. Speaker, on the supremacy of the Constitution. As a Speaker, you have a right to protect the Constitution. You are not a conveyor belt. The fact that the minority side or majority want to change, if it is something that is unconstitutional or illegal, you cannot just be a conveyor belt where you just read a communication simply because the standing order says the Speaker shall not. Mr. Speaker, sir, you have an obligation to protect our Constitution. You have an obligation to build a precedent, the tradition of the Parliament, so that I would hate, Mr. Speaker, to go the same path, that when the majority side, then the Jubilee, change the House leadership then. We don't want to set that precedent because that precedent is when the Speaker, at that time, Governor Lusaka, came and read the names. He didn't give a ruling. He never gave a ruling and he left. So we cannot go through the same path. And at that time, Mr. Speaker, so let us enrich this process so that people who are purporting to change leadership, Mr. Speaker, if they want to change leadership, is it majority or minority, at least they are aware that when you bring your names to the Senate, you want to change the way you change your clothes, Mr. Speaker. It doesn't happen that. There must be a process. Mr. Speaker, I appeal to you, don't be intimidated, don't be blackmailed or be forced. You are our Speaker, we elected with you. You must stand with the rule of law and fidelity of the law. And the minority side, Mr. Speaker, should be patient enough and allow you to draft your communication. You are a man who is a seasoned lawyer. I know you might be in page 20 in your dispense of wisdom in this matter of minority side. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I thank you. I wish I could refer Senator Cherargei to Standing Order 105, but let that matter just rest there. The Speaker, there is no senator, either on the majority side or the minority side, who is trying to force the Speaker to do anything that the Speaker is not supposed to do. Mr. Speaker, I thank you for your communication. But as the Deputy Minority Leader, Mr. Speaker, I also want to go on record to clarify that what the Majority Leader did when he stood on a point of order was to actually just remind you that the Deputy Speaker, whom we all respect, had taken an obligation, he had committed himself, that upon the return of the substantive Speaker, the matter of the leadership of the minority will be communicated. Mr. Speaker, it's actually a big shame, Mr. Speaker, not just to the minority side, but to our collective consciousness as a Senate, that for 2 weeks, now the third week, we are stuck in the rut talking about the leadership of one side of the House. The Speaker, I am not a lawyer. I have never attended a law class. But, Mr. Speaker, I have taken the liberty to really study the standing orders. I can't even pretend or claim to understand these standing orders better than you do, Mr. Speaker. My understanding of the standing orders of the Senate, Mr. Speaker, is that the Speaker of the Senate, on matters political leadership,
has no ruling to make whatsoever. That's my understanding. That's my plain reading of the standing orders. That once either house of the Senate, either the majority or the minority, follow the procedure of changing their leadership, the only duty that the Speaker has is to communicate that change of leadership. The Speaker, what we have done in the course of the last 2 weeks, and now the third week, the Speaker, and I urge you to reject this invitation. We, and I say we very deliberately, we are inviting you to be a judge on matters political leadership. We are inviting you, the Speaker, to make a ruling on a matter that you have absolutely nothing to do with apart from just communicating and satisfying yourself that the side that makes any changes has followed the standing orders. Mr. Speaker, it should be written one day. I hope it will not be said that when the Speaker, Right Honorable Jefferson Kingi, presided over the Senate of the Republic of Kenya, that is the time that the rain started beating the Senate of the Republic of Kenya. The Speaker, yesterday, this side, the majority side, and we respect them, made a decision to change their leadership in their political party. Mr. Speaker, we have absolutely nothing to do with that. It's their decision. We cannot lecture them on who should have. If it was left for me to say, I would have said perhaps Senator Veronica has done a good job. Let her continue doing what she has been doing. But I have nothing to do with that, Mr. Speaker. Why is it that when the leadership of the minority, Mr. Speaker, has followed the standing orders, as you have reprimanded all of us to do, why is it that after we have complied with every provision, every comma, every sentence in these standing orders, why is it that the majority side wants you to make a ruling on that decision, Mr. Speaker? The Speaker, my appeal to you is that, and as Senator Sivuna said, Mr. Speaker, we have serious issues facing this country. Serious issues. In fact, when the people who have elected us to this Senate see us wrangling and fighting and shouting over the leadership of the minority side, they wonder what kind of leaders did we elect to the Senate. People were going without food for days, Mr. Speaker. Today, when I was getting in, a certain Mzee called me from Kitui County and said his children have gone without food for 2 days. And he wants me to find a way of just sending something so that he can buy food. Mr. Speaker, that is a call of leadership. This matter of the leadership of the minority side, Mr. Speaker, I urge you as I conclude, please, Mr. Speaker, reject the invitation to play any role in the determination of who becomes what on either sides of the House. Mr. Speaker, lastly, when we sat here and we decided that we want to change the leadership of our side, and we decided to replace Senator Dulo Fatuma, the senator for Isiolo, with the senator for Narok, Ledama Olekina. The Speaker, the thing that happened on the floor of this House is highly regrettable. That the senator that was replaced took the microphone, called our side all manner of names, and said, if you want this thing, take it. I'm not interested. The following day, Mr. Speaker, that senator went and sat on the majority side. The Speaker, what more evidence do we need that Senator Fatuma Dulo, the senator for Isiolo, has lost the authority to whip this side? The Speaker, whipping is not just a position that is given to members. There is a responsibility to do. You have to mash your members to take a vote. You have to mash your members to make decisions, Mr. Speaker. Tell me, please, Mr. Speaker, who among these members here would allow to be whipped by Senator Dulu. The Speaker, so that we don't paralyze the operations of the minority and by extension the operations of the Senate, I urge you, the Speaker, to do that which Standing Order 23(4) requires of you, and we move forward. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Senators, we cannot, just like Honorable Enokumbua has observed, keep on debating the same thing time and again. Each one of you standing starts with one sentence, that we've got better things to do in this House, clearly meaning that this matter is of less consequence to this House. So then why do we spend a lot of time debating this matter? Why do senators go to the extent of behaving disorderly because of this matter? Now, consistency is a major theme in human beings. In fact, it's a principle. I have watched with amazement this debate. Now, I want to give you and walk with me so that you understand where we are on this matter. Because I can read a lot of insincerity in some of the points of order. I have been informed by the Secretariat. I have combed through the Hansard for the period I was not here. And I know the position. I know what transpired in this House. But for avoidance of doubt, allow me to just jog your memory how this matter started and where we are today, so that all of us were on the same page. By a letter from the minority side, a communication was made to me as the Speaker, communicating changes of the leadership of the minority side. While a communication was being prepared in that regard, for purposes of communicating on the floor of the House, 2 letters were served upon the office of the Speaker. One from Honorable Senator Fatuma Dulo, and the second by Honorable Senator Abdul Haj, stating to the contrary, and yet they are members of Azimio. Now, the minority leader will bear me witness, having served as a judge of the Labor Court, that when 2 parties come before you, however weak one party may have its case, however weak that case will be, you give them a chance to speak to you as an arbiter, as a judge, and then retire to look at the weight of what has been submitted to you as a judge. That is the rule of natural justice. That is exactly what I did. Instead of communicating the letter from the minority side, having been served with a letter to the contrary, as your Speaker, driven by fairness, I had to look at both letters, whether to dismiss, but that is after I have looked at those letters. And looking at those letters, I just needed a few days, in fact, 2 days. Unfortunately, the Thursday that I was supposed to make that communication, I was unwell. And on that Thursday, the communication was not ready. And I informed my deputy who was going to chair that particular day that kindly informed the House that the communication is not ready. If it was ready, the Deputy Speaker would have read it out. Because when he occupies this seat, he exercises the powers of a Speaker. Now, the next immediate day that we would have possibly communicated was Tuesday. By Monday, the communication was ready, and the Secretariat is here to confirm that. It was ready to be communicated on Tuesday at the rise of the House, at the opening of the House. Immediately after administration, the chair was going to communicate as per what the minority had written to us after having considered the letter by the minority leader and the letter by the two senators. Unfortunately, on that Tuesday, at about 1 p.m., the office of the Speaker was served with a court order from the tribunal. I was made aware where I was, and after considering, we had to seek for legal advice. And honorable senators, I'm not just the Speaker, I'm also a lawyer. I'm an officer of the court, just like Sifuna, Mazayo, Mogeni, Maanzo, Mungatana Senator. And I'm not just an officer, I'm not just the Speaker. I'm also lucky to have gone to one of the best schools that are celebrated in this country, the Alliance High School. So I do not suffer from intellectual deficiency when it comes to these matters. That communication was to be made on Tuesday at 2:30. At 1, we were served with a court order from the political parties tribunal. We had two options: to assume we're a monster and ignore the court order, or become an institution that is governed by the rule of law and obey the court order. A communication was made in that regard, and it was delivered here by the Deputy Speaker. The Deputy Speaker ruled that he was unable to read the communication that had earlier been prepared. In fact, if you go to the Hansard, these are the words that the Deputy Speaker said, that the communication that was in fact ready for communication. So at the time he was occupying this chair, the Deputy Speaker knew he had a copy, but the only thing that made him not communicate was the fact that he was stopped by an order from the political parties tribunal. So a ruling, a substantive ruling on why that communication was not made was actually communicated to this House. So, honorable senators, you cannot come back to me today and beg me to make a communication, because a communication was already communicated to the effect that we could not deliver that communication of changes of the minority side pursuant to no order that had been served upon us from the political parties tribunal. That is the ruling, and it's a ruling I'm not willing to disturb. Neither do I have those powers to review. Now, Senator Sifuna, you have used Gor Mahia and FC, the Mashemeji Derby. That is, Gor Mahia wants to substitute. It should never be a concern of the referee. The person who stopped the communication, in fact, is not the referee. It is not the Speaker, because in this match, the Speaker is the referee. The person who stopped that communication is the tribunal, not the Speaker. And as such, my hands are tied. And the reason why I was talking about consistency as a major theme in our lives is what I've witnessed. On the day that the Deputy Speaker was delivering his ruling, immediately after he delivered that ruling, to the effect that his hands are tied by the order from the tribunal, a number of senators rose on points of order, notably Senator Sifuna. And he was very elaborate in his point of order. That if you read that order, it's very clear that the position that is being contested and has been stayed by that court order is the position of the deputy of the minority whip. But as far as the position of the deputy minority whip is concerned, that has not been stayed by the court order. And Senator Sifuna invited the chair to rule as such. On the following day, pursuant to a request and persuasion of Senator Sifuna and others, a communication was made, which communication agreed in totality with what Senator Sifuna had submitted the previous day. And the chair rose here to make the communication. The communication aborted prematurely because there was anarchy and disorder from the very same people who are insisting that please delink those two. Give us the position of the deputy chief whip. We'll await and abide by the outcome of the tribunal. While agreeing with the senators who rose on a point of order in that respect, he was heckled. The deputy speaker was heckled. That communication was not completed. Now, when I walked into my office today, again, I'm talking about consistency. When I walked into my office today, I see a letter from the majority leader, from the minority leader, dated the 23rd of February, 2023. Now, allow me to read this letter, because this is the latest communication to me from the minority leader. It goes as follows. To the Speaker, Senate, Nairobi. Dear Speaker, changes in the representation of names in leadership by the minority side. Kindly note that as agreed, pending the hearing and determination of the matter relating to the changes in the minority side of leadership, be notified that both the minority whip and the deputy minority whip positions status be maintained until the matter is heard and finally determined. Subsequently, any changes to be effected shall be simultaneously to allow smooth transfer of leadership positions. The current deputy minority whip, Senator Ledama Olekina, retains his position until changes are effected. And only upon assent to the new position of minority whip will we relinquish his current position. Signed, Senator Justice Retired, S.M. Mazayo, CBS MP. Honestly, senators, why the consistency here? The latest position from the minority side is please do nothing until the case at the tribunal is determined. What am I seeing today? What are we hearing today? Honorable senators, I'm willing as your senator to guide you accordingly, to be as fair and just as I can. We're in this together. I'm not here for the government side, neither am I here for the opposition side. I'm here for the institution called the Senate. Let us uphold the dignity of this institution. This being the latest correspondence to me from the office of the minority leader, I will abide by it, and it is so communicated. I thank you. Next order.
Order number 8, motion, adoption of the report of the Standing Committee on Finance and Budget on the 2023 budget policy statement.
Chair of Finance and Budget.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I move the motion that the Senate adopts the report of the Standing Committee on Finance and Budget on budget policy statement laid on the table of the Senate on the 28th of February 2023, pursuant to Section 25(7) of Public Finance Management Act and Standing Order number 186(7) of the Senate approves the budget policy statement. Mr. Speaker, sir, the National Treasury submitted to Parliament the budget policy statement of 2023 on the 14th of February 2023, pursuant to Section 25 of Public Finance Management Act. Subsequently, the 2023 budget policy statement was tabled in this Senate on this, at its sitting held on the 15th of February 2023. Pursuant to Standing Order 186(4) of the Senate Standing Orders, the 2023 budget policy statement was committed to the Senate Standing Committee on Finance and Budget, and to submit its recommendation to the committee, to submit its recommendation to the House within 7 days. Mr. Speaker, sir, the budget policy statement is a government policy document that must be considered and approved by Parliament within 14 days after it has been tabled as provided in law. The document sets out the broad strategic priorities and goals, and the national and county government for the national and county government to prepare its budgets. It provides for information on the assessment of current state of the economy and the outlook of in the medium term, the financial outlook, including the macroeconomic forecast. The budget policy statement, Mr. Speaker, sir, also provides for the financial outlook with respect to government revenues and expenditures and the borrowing within the financial year over the medium term. The proposed expenditure limits for the national government, including those of Parliament and the judiciary, as well as other departments. And also it provides for the fiscal responsibility principles and financial objectives over the medium term, including limits on total annual debt and the proposed division of revenue vertically between the county and national government. Mr. Speaker, sir, in compliance with the provisions of the Standing Order 186(6) of Senate Standing Orders, the committee proceeded to undertake the consultative processes by inviting key stakeholders to give their inputs, including various standing committees of the Senate. And among the key stakeholders we've invited is the National Treasury, the Commission of Revenue Allocation, the Council of Governors, the Institute of Certified Public Accountants of Kenya, the International Budget Partnership Kenya chapter, Institute of Economic Affairs, and Institute of Social Responsibility are those that we have invited to give their submissions and written memorandum. Mr. Speaker, sir, the Budget Policy Statement 2023, under the provisions of macro fiscal framework, it is projected that the economy will grow at 6.1% in 2023. This growth will be supported by private sector growth, recovery in agriculture, and the targeted implementation by government of various sectors, including Hustler Fund, which is expected to increase access to private sector financing. From the expenditure perspective, private consumption is expected to support aggregate demand, ongoing labor market recovery, improved consumer confidence, and resilient remittances from abroad. Mr. Speaker, sir, the outlook of the key macroeconomic variables has also been reviewed, including inflation, which is projected to average about 5.8% in 2023-2024, supported by tight monetary policy instance, which is expected to anchor inflation expectations. With regard to the exchange rate, the Kenya shillings has weakened significantly against the US dollar, but remains stable, supported by increased remittances from Kenyans in the diaspora. Adequate foreign exchange reserves and improved export receipts are also cushioning the Kenya shillings a little bit. Mr. Speaker, sir, it is reported that as at November 2022, exports grew by 12.4%, driven by increased receipts from tea and manufactured goods across the closer region or neighbors, but horticulture declined. It is also noted that imports increased by 11.7% in the same period, mainly due to increased imports in oil and other intermediate goods. Mr. Speaker, sir, regarding the fiscal framework, the National Treasury projects ordinary revenues collected to stand at 2.571 trillion against a recurrent and development expenditure of 2.459 trillion and 744.2 billion respectively. To this extent, there is a projected fiscal deficit of Kenya shilling 720 billion in the financial year 2023-2024, translating to 4.4% of the GDP. To meet this deficit, the National Treasury proposes to borrow 521.5 billion from the domestic market and net foreign financing of 198.6 billion in the financial year 2023-2024. This additional foreign debt is expected to increase future statutory expenditures. Mr. Speaker, sir, with regard to division of revenue, where this Senate need to be extremely concerned with, in the financial year 2023-2024, National Treasury proposes an allocation to counties of 385.4 billion. An amount, that amount has increased by about 15 billion from the 370 that the counties received in the preceding financial year. Due to adjustment of revenue growth, that is the 15 billion that was given. An allocation of 425 million is given towards transfer of library functions to counties. It is indicated that the proposed equitable share allocation of 24.5% of the last audited account of 1.573 billion for financial year 2019-2020 and 15% of projected revenue for financial year 2023-2024. Mr. Speaker, sir, to justify the proposal, the proposed county equitable share allocation, the National Treasury argues that the national government continues to experience high level of debt in the context of limited avenues to finance the budget gap. There are increased government expenditures that relates to drought intervention, fertilizer subsidy, hustler fund, among others that was cited by the National Treasury as reasons why the county governments could not be allocated much money. Mr. Speaker, sir, it is proposed that the county governments will receive additional allocation amounting to 44.3 billion shillings in the financial year 2023-2024. This comprises of 11.1 billion from the national government share of revenue and 33.19 from proceeds of external loans and grants. The conditional grants from the national government share of revenue are towards leasing of medical equipments at 5.86 billion, operationalization of national government program on aggregated industrial parks allocated 4.7 billion, supplement for construction of county headquarters for 5 counties allocated 454 million. Mr. Speaker, sir, it's important to also note that there is also a conditional allocation of 108.7 being revenues relating to court fines resulting from legislation of counties collected by the courts. Mr. Speaker, sir, the committee considered the 2023 budget policy statement and made several observations. Among them, it's critical for the Senate to know, the national government commit to ensure that there is complete transfer of county functions within 6 months as per the directives by the President when he addressed Parliament. However, it was not provided for in terms of comprehensive list of county functions that still are being performed by national government and how those functions can be transferred and funds follow the functions. B, the proposed equitable share allocation to county governments is based to the last audited account of 2019-2020, which has been audited and approved by the National Assembly. The committee notes that the audited and approved amount for financial year 2019-2020 is not what was captured in budget policy statement of 1.5 trillion, but rather 1.730 trillion. And that means there is an error in terms of how the figures have been computed. The budget policy statement based its entire planning on 1.573 billion as the last audited and approved by National Assembly, whereas the figure of 2019-2020 accurate stands at 1.730 trillion. Similarly, the allocation to equalization fund was based on this erroneous figure for 2019-2020. Mr. Speaker, sir, there is an inequitable sharing of revenue between the two levels of government, given that the national government proposed allocation in financial year 2023-2024 has increased by 23%, while the county allocation has only increased by 4.2%. The committee notes that the budget policy statement has not given any policy guidelines on measures to be taken to unlock arrears in allocation to equalization fund for the previous financial years that has not been provided for. E, the leasing of medical equipment continues to receive funding despite unclear reporting on the progress made in the program. In fact, the contract is not known to county governments, the content is not known, and even that is not known has expired. And as at now, we don't have a renewed contract that the county government has signed with anybody, as far as the information that we have is concerned. Mr. Speaker, sir, county governments are accumulating pending bills at a very fast rate. So is the national government. The budget policy statement has only stated the pending bills for county governments, but did not provide the same information for national government. While the budget policy statement of 2023 proposes an unconditional allocation of 108.7 million to 10 county governments as proceeds from court fines collected through enforcement of county laws, the transfer mechanism in terms of legislation and how that is going to take effect has also not been captured or a proposal given. The inclusion of 425 million meant for library services under the 385.425 was also erroneous, as this can, once included under the shareable revenue of 385.425, it will only mean it can equitably be shared, and the 33 counties will not stand to benefit, that were supposed to benefit, that have libraries. Whereas the Hustler Fund meets a critical gap in terms of private sector credit access, there are other existing funds such as Biashara Fund, Uwezo Fund, Women Enterprise Fund, and Youth Fund, which were established to meet similar objectives. However, there is need for these funds, including Uwezo, to be able to communicate with each other to avoid duplication. Mr. Speaker, sir, the committee, having considered the 2023 budget policy statement, recommends that the Senate proceed to consider and approve the report with the proposed policy recommendations and financial recommendations given by the committee. Among the recommendations are A, the 425 million proposed as additional equitable share of transfer in lieu of library services earmarked for salaries for respective staff for the 55 libraries to benefit 33 counties be transferred to counties as conditional allocation under the County Government Additional Allocation Bill. B, the National Treasury should not transfer funds on medical equipment services, but rather add that fund to equitable share for counties to share, because the MES project is marred with a bit of controversy in terms of details and information, and there is no existing contract. Mr. Speaker, sir, noting that drought has become cyclic in nature, and given the intensity of drought in our counties, there has not been in budget policy statement clear direction in terms of drought mitigation in the long term in that document. The National Treasury, in collaboration with Kenya Roads Board, should also put in place necessary mechanism to ensure the Roads Maintenance Levy Fund, which in the previous year was dispersed as equitable share, to be dispersed to county governments as additional allocation in line with the earlier years, which this fund has really benefited county governments. And the National Treasury must comply with the constitutional requirement relating to equalization fund and submit to the Senate within the next 30 days of approval of this budget policy statement 2023, a framework on how they intend to clear the arrears of monies due to the fund. Mr. Speaker, sir, the committee recommends fast-tracking of the development and enactment of legal framework to enable direct remittance to counties of court fines. The computation of total amount set aside for the equalization fund as per Article 2041 of the Constitution, which states 0.5% of all revenues. Before setting any revenue aside, the National Treasury should compute based on Article 2041. Mr. Speaker, sir, the growth in county equitable share should be commensurate and reflect the projected revenue growth. The national government revenue is projected the committee recommends that county equitable share be also grown at 8.4% to 407 billion. That takes care of the inflation, as well as also give 44.3 billion to county governments. Mr. Speaker, sir, also on the borrowing with respect to debt ceiling, 720 billion that is proposed, that will be outside the 10 trillion debt ceiling that has been set. And as such, we have only a gap of 600 billion that can be borrowed. Mr. Speaker, sir, the committee takes the opportunity to commend all the stakeholders that have responded to our invitation to give their submission, the standing committees for their submission, as well as the Office of the Speaker and the Clerk for facilitating the same. I also wish to thank the Office of the Speaker and the Clerk of the Senate for the support they have extended. I move and request Senator Tabitha to second. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I do second.
Honorable Senators, I now proceed to propose the question that the Senate adopt the report of the Standing Committee on Finance and Budget on the 2023 budget policy statement laid on the table of the Senate on Tuesday, 28th February 2023, and pursuant to Section 25(7) of the Public Finance Management Act and Standing Orders 186(7) of the Senate, approves the 2023 budget policy statement. Honorable Senators, you may proceed to make your contributions. Senator Kari.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity to contribute to this budget policy statement. Mr. Speaker, this being the first budget policy statement by the Kenya Kwanza government, I wish to commend the National Treasury for their candidness in going head-on to resolve the economic crisis and to tackle the huge debt issues that Kenya has been undergoing. And Mr. Speaker, out of the 5 priority areas in this budget policy statement, allow me to single out the digital highway and creative industry. Mr. Speaker, if we are to compete economically and to grow economically, we must leverage on technology. And I want to commend the President, His Excellency William Ruto, and thank him because of giving digital and ICT the attention that it deserves. This is a big industry, a billion-dollar industry where if it is supported, it will create a lot of jobs for our youth. And Mr. Speaker, this budget policy statement demonstrates the willingness of the Kenya Kwanza government in steering our economy from the mess that was created by the previous regime. Mr. Speaker, I also wish to commend the KRA for the strategies that they have put in place to deal and to harness the collection of revenue. And they're also leveraging on technology as they have joined with the telecommunication companies, as stated in that statement. They have also sought to digitalize the rent and the property and the rental income, as well as digitalizing the customs and the border operations. Mr. Speaker, I am of the view that if this policy statement is supported, the country will benefit and we are going to harness development. I also urge leaders, and especially leaders in the Azimio side, to engage in politics of development as outlined in this budget policy statement, as opposed to what they are on about right now, demonstrations and politics of hula baloo that do not help Kenyans. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I support.
What's your point of order, Majority Leader?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I raise understanding order number 109. It's not a standing order that actually it's not one of my favorite, but with the indulgence of colleagues, noting that it is barely 40 minutes to the rise of the House, that if we were to go into maybe a long debate, there are members who, for one reason or the other, are requesting that we conclude on this matter. The problem being, Mr. Speaker, that today is the last day. One of the things we struggle with as a House is that our recommendations on BPS, the recommendations that Senator Roba is presenting, and I know this, I presented this for the last 9 years, Treasury always ignores them. We are trying to get to a point where our resolutions as a House are respected. Now imagine, Mr. Speaker, the tragedy, because if we fail to pass BPS today, there's no problem. People will still proceed, Treasury will go ahead and do whatever they need to do. And it is on that reason that I have requested, though there are colleagues who maybe for one reason or the other wanted to say one or two things, that I humbly request to invoke standing order number 109 and request that the mover be called to reply so that we can proceed to vote before we lose the numbers, Mr. Speaker.
Senators, can you have your seats? Honorable Senators, the Majority Leader has just rose on a point of order under Order 109.1. The only way to dispose of that particular point of order is to proceed to propose the question. If it carries the day, I'll call the mover to reply. If it doesn't carry the day, then we proceed with debate. So, Honorable Senators, pursuant to that point of order that has been raised, I now put the question that the mover be now called upon to reply. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. For as many as of the contrary opinion say nay. Nay. The ayes have it. May the mover proceed to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, sir. I beg to reply, and I say this budget policy document is a very critical document for the functioning of a normal functioning of the government. We have contacted all the critical stakeholders. The committees of this House have all given their input. We've received input from 11 committees, meaning it has been extensively interrogated by various committees of this House, and the inputs have been considered. I am grateful that the committees have also given their input, so as the other stakeholders. And as I conclude, I beg to reply. Thank you.
Honorable Senators, I do make a determination that indeed this matter does not affect counties. Honorable Senators, Sorry for that. I do hereby, pursuant to Standing Order 84-2, do make a determination that this matter indeed do affect counties, and voting shall be by delegation. And we're going to do it electronically. Clerk, proceed. Sergeant at Arms, kindly ring the bell for 3 minutes. Sergeant at Arms, kindly ring the bell for a further 5 minutes. Sergeant at Arms, kindly proceed to ring the bell for a further 3 minutes.